Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Clouds on AO3. Now, let's start. The death of a dream. Izuku numbly watched the door shut behind All Might. 𝐭𝐿 had been right, he really couldn't be a hero. Izuku felt the tears prickling at the corners of his eyes and looked around. If he went home right now, Mom would hear him crying in his room and wonder what was wrong, and Izuku didn't really feel up to explaining himself right then. This rooftop, however, was completely deserted. Making his decision, he sat down and hugged his knees to his chest as he let himself break down. He should have known that would be All Might's answer. He had studied quirks for years, so he of all people should know that a quirkless teenager had no chance of beating villains with strong quirks. He couldn't even beat 𝐭𝐿. He should have seen this coming, so why did it still hurt so much? After a few minutes of this, he became vaguely aware of the sounds of fireworks in the distance and almost stood up to look before changing his mind and curling up even tighter as he sobbed harder. The fireworks would probably look pretty and might even cheer him up a little bit, but Izuku wasn't really in the mood for pretty things. No matter how cool they looked, fireworks wouldn't be able to put his shattered dream back together. The explosions were a good background for his pity party though, Izuku thought with a wet chuckle. It was almost like the world itself was celebrating that he'd finally come to terms with reality. He couldn't really tell if he was sobbing or laughing at the mental image of 𝐭𝐿 and his teachers in party hats, gathering around a cake with All Might's true form on it as they set off confetti poppers. Congratulations. He was definitely laughing now. 𝐭𝐿 would totally have a disgruntled expression on his face at being forced into a party hat, but Auntie Mistuki would probably just hit him on the head if he tried to take it off. Mom would be the one to cut the cake, and she'd look proud and relieved as she gave him the first piece and told him to be sure to pick something safe for his next dream. Izuku took a deep breath and stood up, wiping the last of his tears from his cheeks. There was still a dull ache in his chest, and he still didn't know what he was supposed to do now, but... well, it probably wasn't the best coping mechanism, but he felt like his imaginary pity party was almost like a funeral for his aspirations of being a hero. Wait, was this feeling grief? That would make sense, but it seemed weird to feel grief for something that wasn't a person. His dream was kind of like a pet, right? He'd cared for it for years and refused to let go, and now it was gone, so it was probably okay to be a little sad. The sun had set sometime during his breakdown, so Izuku hurried straight home, only pausing once to check his reflection in a shop window to make sure his eyes weren't too red. He ran up the stairs to his apartment and quickly took off his shoes before digging in his backpack for his hero analysis notebook. Between the sludge villain and the koi pond, he was lucky that it was legible at all. He should put it in the freezer to save it so he could transfer his notes into another book, then he could carefully take out the pages that All Might had signed and frame them. "I'm home," he called out as he walked toward the kitchen. He should put the notebook in a plastic bag before putting it in the freezer so it didn't get anything gross on the food. His thoughts were interrupted by his mom running at him so fast that she slid across the kitchen floor and almost knocked him down with the force of her hug. "Oh, Izuku. I was so worried about you." Izuku looked at the clock. He wasn't that much later than he normally was. He knew for a fact he'd gotten home much later because he'd lost track of time watching hero fights, so why was Mom so worried today? She couldn't know what All Might had told him yet, could she? Mom was still talking, rambling in her worry. "I saw about Katsuki on the news and I know that you take that route home sometimes, and I couldn't see you and you weren't answering your phone and I was just imagining what would have happened if the villain had grabbed you instead, because Katsuki was barely fighting him off with his explosions and..." Izuku went cold. "What? What happened to 𝐭𝐿?" Mom froze. "Why, you didn't know?" Izuku shook his head frantically and stared at her with wide eyes. Mom pressed her lips together in worry, then led him into the living room and unmuted the TV. There was a young reporter on the screen, backlit against a few still-burning fires as backdraft, and a few other heroes lingered in the background. The sludge villain seemed to be intent on suffocating his victim. Thankfully, the heroes on the scene were able to keep the others in the area safe until the arrival of All Might, who defeated the villain and saved the hostage, as expected of the #1 hero. The sludge villain has now been taken into custody by police, while the hostage and several bystanders were taken to the hospital for various injuries. They had to take him to the hospital. Izuku fretted. Is he going to be okay? Thankfully, Mom nodded quickly. Mistuki said he won't even have to stay the night. The only reason they took him at all was because he apparently passed out for a minute or two before All Might got to him, but he's going to be okay. Izuku sighed in relief. He wasn't sure what he'd do if 𝐭𝐿 had been hurt or died. It would have been his fault for distracting All Might and making him use up all his time, and Izuku wasn't sure if he'd be able to deal with that, especially since the description of the villain sounded like the one All Might had saved Izuku from, which meant that Izuku distracting him probably allowed the villain to escape. It was a good thing he'd already held the funeral for his dream, because there was no way he was capable of being a hero if he let villains escape like that. But 𝐭𝐿 was okay. All Might saved him. Oh no! Was All Might okay? Izuku quickly excused himself and ran to his computer to look up footage of the fight. All Might didn't look tired, but then again, he didn't look like a skeleton either, so. Izuku knew he was good at hiding things. He almost melted in relief when All Might jumped away without talking to a single reporter as soon as 𝐭𝐿 was safe. He was already past his limit when he talked to Izuku, and he'd probably had to go beyond that to save 𝐭𝐿, but that didn't mean he had to force himself to stay and chat. Hopefully he was at home taking a well-deserved nap. Izuku spent the rest of the night studying the fight. The sludge villain was a lot less impressive when he wasn't drowning in it, but apparently the heroes on the scene before All Might got there didn't agree, because they seemed at a loss for what to do. Izuku pulled out a new notebook and started analyzing. While it made sense for Backdraft to fight the fires, it would have been better to prioritize the rescue and have him dilute the villain enough for him to let go of 𝐭𝐿. It would have meant leaving the fires burning, but since there were more fires the longer 𝐭𝐿 was held hostage, it would have been better in the long run. Mount Lady could have helped with evacuation, especially if Backdraft was busy taking care of the villain. Her height prevented her from getting into the narrow street where the fight was, but it was wide enough that she could have reached her arm in and let people climb onto it from the upper windows. And if she could reach her arm in, it might even have been possible for her to grab 𝐭𝐿 from the villain without ever stepping into the street, depending on how far down the street they were. Kamu Woods and Death Arms were more difficult, but if Kamu had looped around to come at the villain from behind, he might have been able to grab 𝐭𝐿 without getting in range of his hands. Death Arms could easily have helped with evacuation. Eventually, Mom confiscated his notebook and forced him to go to bed, but Izuku's head still kept him awake for another hour going through all the possibilities of how that fight could have gone differently. Finally, his thoughts slowed down enough for him to slowly drift off to sleep with one last coherent thought. Is there a way to help heroes work smarter? Let's do something at school. Alright students, remember that your finalized high school application plans need to be turned into the guidance counselor by the end of the week. The teacher said boredly. So if you want to make any changes, they need to be done by then. The bell rang and Izuku hurried to put the rest of his books and get out of the room before 𝐭𝐿 could corner him. Things had been kinda weird since the sludge villain incident a few days ago, and it seemed like 𝐭𝐿 was constantly 2 seconds away from exploding, even more so than he usually was, at least. It probably had something to do with the fact that he had to be saved, and he was probably thinking that their classmates were looking down on him for being weak, so Izuku just thought it would be smarter to avoid him until things calmed down a little bit. Unfortunately, 𝐭𝐿 had other plans. Izuku had barely managed to get out the front gates of the school when he found himself being slammed into the wall. He coughed as he struggled to catch his breath again, clutching his backpack to his chest so 𝐭𝐿 couldn't steal it. He had just finished transferring all his hero analysis notes into a fresh notebook. He couldn't let it get destroyed again. You heard what Teach said. 𝐭𝐿 scowled as he held Izuku against the wall. It's your last chance to change your mind about going to UA, you DMN nerd. You'd better take it, because there's no chance a worthless nobody like you is ever gonna be a hero. I know, Izuku muttered. 𝐭𝐿 froze. What did you just say? Izuku took a deep breath. I said I know, 𝐭𝐿. I can't even defend myself from villains, how could I ever hope to defend other people? You were right, I'm never going to be a hero. Izuku took advantage of the short moment 𝐭𝐿 stood there gaping like a fish to pull out of his grip and run down the street, blinking away his tears. It was one thing admitting the truth to himself, but it was another thing entirely to say it to 𝐭𝐿 like that. It made it more real, somehow, and even though the pain was a lot less than it had been when All Might first gave him a reality check, it still hurt. And now everyone would know. It wouldn't take long for 𝐭𝐿 to rant about it to his lackeys, and from there it would spread like wildfire, and soon enough, the entire school would know that Izuku Midoriya had finally given up on his dream of being a hero. It would be too late to change his mind. But then again, wasn't it too late already? It had been too late ever since he turned 4. He was running out of time to find his new dream. Their high school plans were due in just a few days, but Izuku didn't know what he was supposed to write. He'd always wanted to go to UA because it was the best heroic school in Japan, but now he knew that he couldn't be a hero. It put everything into question. Maybe he should go to a different high school, since he didn't need to go to a school with a hero course anymore, but he still thought it would be cool to go to UA. It was where All Might had gone. He could just go into general studies. Or maybe one of the other courses would be better. Izuku ran a hand through his curls, wincing as his fingers caught in the tangles, and sighed. He needed to do a little more research before he made a decision. He sat down at his computer as soon as he got home and pulled up UA's website, navigating to the application page. He'd never actually read through the information about all the different courses, since he'd been too fixated on the hero course, but better late than never, right? Thankfully, there was a page on UA's explaining each of the different courses and how to apply. Izuku started off by reading about general studies, obviously, since that was most likely where he'd end up. It seemed pretty standard, honestly. They would teach him the basic subjects, but Izuku didn't know how to feel about the fact that it didn't have any particular focus. General studies would look good on his resume, but that seemed to be all it would do for him. He didn't want to get bored. Izuku bit his lip and clicked on the business course. There seemed to be a lot of money management involved in that one, which didn't really appeal to him. The heroic analytics classes sounded slightly better, but they mostly approached things from a marketing standpoint, rather than focusing on quirks like Izuku did. He decided to put a pin in that one. If he didn't find anything better, business might be a decent option, but it wasn't going to be his first choice. He almost just closed his browser instead of reading the page on the support course. He wasn't an engineer. He didn't have any experience in mechanics or fixing things, and while he found the way support items interacted with quirks interesting, he wasn't really interested in making them. But he'd looked through all the other courses, so he may as well glance at support, if only to complete the set. At first, the support course looked exactly like what Izuku expected. There were pictures of students standing with their inventions and groups of kids with grease-covered cheeks smiling at the camera, a wide variety of power tools and other things he couldn't name in the background. Try as he might, Izuku just couldn't see himself there, but then he noticed the different tracks. The business course obviously had different areas of emphasis, like marketing or economics, but Izuku had just assumed that support was like heroics or general studies, where all the students were grouped together and had similar goals. But about halfway down the support course information page, there was an explanation of different tracks within the support course. The first was invention, which the website said was obviously the most popular option. It focused on being able to create and maintain support items, specifically for heroes. Izuku had just kinda assumed that was what the entire support course did. What else could there be? Support items for civilians. But UA was a hero school. He scrolled past the invention track down to the next option. Design. It focused entirely on the aesthetics of hero costumes, something that Izuku hadn't even thought about as being part of support. It was a decently popular emphasis, and the students worked frequently with the business school to make sure they were designing looks that could sell, and with the invention track to make sure any support items visually matched the rest of the hero's costume. Izuku didn't think he was really artistic enough to enjoy that, though. That brought him to the final track, which almost seemed like it had been added to the list as an afterthought. Intelligence and analytics. Unlike the other two tracks, there weren't any pictures advertising that emphasis, and it didn't seem like it was chosen very often, but as he read the short paragraph, Izuku gradually became so excited he could hardly breathe. Students in the Intelligence and Analytics track of UA's support course focus on quirk analysis and helping heroes improve their quirk control and skill. Students are trained in how to obtain useful information to help heroes and detectives track down and defeat villains, as well as how to use quirk analysis to pinpoint villains' weaknesses. Interested students also have the option of taking courses in strategy if desired. Izuku couldn't help but think of the heroes that stood on the sidelines and waited for All Might while Kaken was being attacked by the sludge villain. If he joined the support course, he could share his strategies with them. He could help the heroes strategize better and use their quirks more intelligently to take down villains and protect people. It was too dangerous for a quirkless kid like him to be on the front lines, but that didn't mean he couldn't work behind the scenes to make sure the heroes had all the tools and information they needed so that they knew what to do. He could help the heroes work smarter. It was perfect. Izuku glanced over at his collection of hero analysis for the future. All these years, he'd assumed that the future he was preparing for was his career as a hero, but maybe this whole time, he'd really been preparing for a career in hero support. His cheeks were starting to hurt from how widely he was smiling, and he was vaguely aware of the fact that he was mumbling as his brain spun with plans and possibilities. He would have to work hard for the next 10 months if he had any chance of passing the entrance exam, but rather than being intimidated by the challenge, Izuku just felt invigorated. He grabbed a brand new notebook from his desk and wrote support course preparation on the cover. Izuku Midoriya had found a new dream. And this time, it was attainable. The final 10 months before the entrance exam flew by almost too quickly. One of the first things Izuku had done after finding his new dream was research everything he could find about analytics and intelligence gathering. He couldn't find that much, which he supposed shouldn't be very surprising, considering that he hadn't even known it was a career option, but the things that he could find emphasized computer skills and making sure that his analysis was understandable to other people. Izuku had worked non-stop to make sure he was ready for the entrance exam today. It was difficult, since UA's website didn't say what exactly he'd be asked to do, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. He threw himself into support with a passion, spending hours researching everything that heroes needed to know going into a situation and thinking about what he could do from behind the scenes to make them more effective. His hero analysis notebooks had improved as well. He still labeled them for the future, but he was now trying to focus on suggestions for improvement and on increasing the speed of his analysis. Izuku had shifted the focus of the notebooks from just heroes to everything to do with quirks and even battle strategy. He filled an entire notebook just with analyses of villains he'd seen on the news, and another with random quirks that he found on the street. He'd also stopped taking them out at school so that his bullies wouldn't be tempted to destroy these ones like they had all the others. School had surprisingly gotten a lot better for Izuku over the past few months. His bullies hadn't stopped after the word spread that he wasn't trying for the hero course anymore, but now everyone was at a loss for how to actually hurt him. He hadn't told anyone at school about the support course, since the high school application plans simply listed the school, not the emphasis. The teachers assumed he'd swayed his goal to general studies, and from what Izuku could gather, the other students thought he was going for the nearest high school with a high acceptance rate. As a result, no one could target his new dream and all their insults fell flat. Even Kaken had swayed to mostly ignoring him, or just calling him useless, which was a huge improvement. One of the best things that had come from his new dream, though, was actually his relationship with his mother. He hadn't realized just how much his old dream had come between them, but now that it was no longer in the way, they'd grown so much closer. Her worry seemed less like she was trying to suffocate him, and more like it was just how she showed that she cared. When he'd sat her down to talk about his new dream, she had immediately started crying. Izuku had understandably started panicking, wondering what he had said wrong, but as soon as she had calmed down enough to be coherent, Mom had assured him that she was just so happy and proud of him. He hadn't been quite sure how to feel about the fact that her first reaction to him giving up on his lifelong dream was to be so happy that she cried, but there wasn't much he could do about it. Maybe if she had just believed in him earlier. Izuku shook his head as he finished getting ready to leave. It wouldn't do any good to worry about what ifs right now. Mom was just trying to keep him safe, so it made perfect sense that she would be happy that he'd picked a safer option. She had been a little nervous about him still working in the heroics industry, But after he'd assured her that he wouldn't actually be fighting anyone, she'd calmed down and had actually been surprisingly supportive. He carefully placed his laptop in his bag and smiled. Mom had gotten it for him as a celebration gift after he'd explained what intelligence and analytics was, and it had actually been her idea to sign him up for computer programming lessons at their local community center. He'd taken to them like a duck to water, and it hadn't been long at all before he'd started learning to hack. Mom didn't necessarily like when he called it hacking, since she thought that sounded dangerous or like something a villain would do, but Izuku had pointed out that it would be a really useful way to gather information. He'd be protected behind a screen, and the only people he'd be hacking were villains, to make sure they couldn't hide anything from the heroes. She'd come around pretty quickly after that. The last thing he packed was the portfolio he'd created to demonstrate his quirk analysis. 𝐎𝐸𝐲 website had said that in addition to the same written exam that all the other courses took, the support course exam consisted of a portfolio and a practical. Izuku had spent months debating what to put in his portfolio before Mom had suggested simply turning in one of his hero analysis notebooks. He didn't feel like those were quite good enough to turn into 𝐎𝐸𝐲, though, so he decided to turn in a new analysis notebook that was actually properly formatted. He'd picked 5 heroes and 5 villains to highlight, since the website had said he'd be analyzing both as part of 𝐎𝐸𝐲, and he'd had Mom read through all of them to make sure they didn't just sound like his normal muttering. When he'd first started asking her to read his analyses to make sure other people could understand them, she'd pointed out that he wrote almost completely in run-on sentences and sometimes dropped words completely because his brain was moving faster than his hands could. He'd focused since then on editing his analyses into a coherent whole and making them easy to understand. The heroes he would eventually be working with needed to be able to read though and find what they needed, after all, so there needed to be some sort of formatting, and he couldn't use a lot of technical jargon, not that he ever really had. He'd experimented quite a bit and had even looked up how professional analysts formatted their essays for inspiration. Overall, Izuku was actually extremely proud of how professional his portfolio looked once he was finished, and Mom hadn't had any trouble understanding it, so that was a huge plus. Mom scooped him into a hug almost as soon as he made it to the kitchen. "Oh baby. Do you have everything? Do you have your laptop? Will you even need your laptop? It's best to just bring it, right, even if you don't need it. Or will that be weird? They won't see it as cheating, will they? Oh, if only." "Mom, take a deep breath." He pulled away from her and smiled. "I'll be fine. I already checked the website, and support course applicants are allowed to bring any technology they think they'll need. I don't know if I'll need my laptop, but I want to be able to demonstrate my hacking if they ask me to." Mom sighed in relief. "Oh, that's good. I'm just so worried. I know you'll be fine and safe, but a mother worries, you know." Izuku laughed. "I know. Don't worry, the support course exam isn't like the hero course one, so I'm not going to get hurt. Just be glad you're not Auntie Mitsuki today. No matter what the hero course practical is, there's bound to be some aspect of combat included." Mom wrung her hands nervously. "Oh, I don't think I'd be able to handle it. I know Katsuki can handle himself in a fight, but I'm just so glad you're not trying for the hero course. I'm not sure I'd even be able to let you leave the house without having a heart attack." Izuku smiled sadly. His grief had long since faded to a dull ache, and he hardly even noticed it anymore most days, but his nervousness about the entrance exam was bringing everything to the surface again. What if he'd made the wrong choice? What if he was meant to be a hero? What if he'd never really be satisfied with the support course? What if 𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐾 was right and he really was useless and he failed the entrance exam and ended up living under a bridge and— "Stop that, Izuku." Mom hit him gently on the arm and smiled to pull him from his spiral. "I'm the one who's supposed to be worrying, so just leave that to me, and you focus on doing your best. Okay, baby." Izuku smiled and nodded in determination. "Thanks, Mom. I should get going. Wish me luck." "Good luck." Mom started sniffling as he put on his shoes, then started full-on crying as he waved to her when he got down to the street. Izuku gripped the straps of his backpack and took a deep breath as he headed toward the train station. He could do this. Izuku actually ended up getting to 𝐎𝐸𝐲 a few minutes early enough that he didn't even see 𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐾, who should be taking the hero course exam today, on his way in. He looked up at the building, not even bothering to conceal his or considering that he was far from the only applicant gaping at the fact that they were actually at UA. After a long moment, he shook himself and hurried into the building, taking everything in as he followed the signs to the support course exam orientation. He ended up in a large room lined with desks that were almost completely empty except for a few other early arrivals like himself. Izuku swallowed nervously as they all looked up at his arrival, his anxiety already getting the better of him as he ran to one of the seats in the back corner. He really wasn't ready to meet his future tormentors quite yet. After a few minutes of sitting in the oppressively silent room, Izuku decided that he needed to find something to distract himself. The longer he just sat there, the more he worried that he was somehow making a terrible mistake, or that he would fail the exam, or that the proctors would come up to him and tell him that UA had actually decided to not accept quirkless applicants this year. He could always analyze his fellow examinees and see if he could guess their quirks, but he knew that as soon as he started analyzing, he would also start mumbling, which would sound even louder in the quiet room, and then any hope he had of fading into the background would go out the window. Izuku thought for a moment before getting out his laptop. From what he'd read, UA had impressive cybersecurity, so it wouldn't hurt to take a look at their firewalls, right? He looked at the clock. He still had another 20 minutes until the exam started, and if he didn't do anything, he was going to go insane, so this would be a good way to keep himself busy and satisfy his curiosity at the same time. The rumors really had an exaggerated UA security. Anywhere that Izuku would normally look for holes or backdoors were patched up and defended, and he grinned as he had to get more and more creative the more he poked around. Most villains would probably just take one look at the programs and decide to go hack somewhere less secure. Maybe if he were to. "What are you doing?" Izuku yelped and slammed his laptop shut, leaning back as far as he could to get away from the girl who was suddenly way too close to his face. He glanced around the room to find that most of the seats were filled. How long had he been trying to get past UA's firewalls? And more importantly, how long had this girl been there and how hadn't he noticed when she got in his personal space? Also, she was a girl. He swallowed nervously, but the girl didn't seem to be backing off anytime soon. "Nothing." The girl grinned savagely, her pupils narrowing slightly, something that was made more obvious by the crosshairs in them. "If it was nothing, you wouldn't have been doing it." Were the crosshairs a result of her quirk? If so, then what was it? It was obviously something to do with her vision, and she seemed to be able to change her pupil size at will, so maybe it was like a telescope. That would be really cool. What were the limitations and... Oh, she was still staring at him. "Do you have a telescope quirk?" Izuku blurted out the question before his self-control caught up to his curiosity, then promptly turned bright red and started freaking out. Of course, the first time a girl ever willingly talks to him and he has to make a fool of himself by asking about her quirk like some kind of creepy idiot. The girl didn't seem put off by it though. In fact, her grin just got bigger. "I'll tell you about my quirk if you tell me what you were doing on your computer." Izuku thought for a moment. He really wanted to know more about her quirk, but would she think he was weird? What was he thinking? She already thought he was weird. And he didn't know why. Maybe it was because she had gotten so close to him despite never meeting him before, but she didn't really seem like the type to stop talking to people just because they were weird. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. He smiled sheepishly. "I was trying to get past UA's firewalls." The girl blinked at him for a moment, then laughed loudly. "That's awesome. Hacking UA before the exam even starts, what a way to make a first impression." Izuku's eyes widened and his stomach dropped. "Oh no. What was I thinking? I just wanted something to do and I've probably ruined my chances. They're gonna think I'm some kind of villain," and he was startled from his mumbling by the girl flicking him on the forehead. "Did you have any luck?" He tilted his head. "What? Did you have any luck hacking UA?" No." Izuku didn't know why she didn't seem freaked out at all. In fact, she was acting like him hacking UA was a good thing. "Too bad." The girl shrugged. "That probably would have been a great way to get your foot in the door." Izuku thought about that for a moment, but it made his brain spin, so he just shook his head. "Well, I told you what I was doing. What about you? What's your quirk?" "Zoom." The girl was grinning again, and Izuku would probably have been intimidated if her energy wasn't so contagious. You weren't that far off with your telescope idea. I can see things as far away as 5 kilometers, but I mostly use it to zoom in on tiny things while I make my babies. Izuku's face went red again and he sputtered, "Bee babies?" She nodded, "Yep. I make all sorts of cool babies for heroes to use. My favorite baby is the jetpack I designed." She dug in her bag for a moment before slamming a grease-smeared folder in front of him. Izuku hesitated for a moment, but she looked like she was expecting him to do something, so he opened the folder and looked at the detailed blueprints inside. "These are really cool. Is this your portfolio?" She nodded. "Where's yours?" Izuku put his laptop back in his bag and handed her his own portfolio before going back to looking through her blueprints. A lot of it was technical jargon that he didn't understand, but after a minute, he thought he had a good idea of how the jetpack was supposed to work. "Is this based on Airjet's backpack?" "Yep. It's a super cool flying baby." The girl looked to be about halfway through his portfolio. "And these are really cool notes, Hakukuan, but weren't you supposed to bring blueprints for your babies?" Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, actually, that's only for the invention track. I'm applying for intelligence and analytics, so, yeah, The girl looked back and forth between Izuku and his portfolio, then grinned. "That means that we'll have to work together so I can make super awesome babies based off your notes." She stuck her hand out for him to shake. "I'm Mai Hatsume, future CEO of Hatsume Industries. What's your name, Hakukuan?" Izuku grinned and took her hand. "Izuku Midoriya. Pleasure to meet you, Hatsume." "Oh, just call me Mai, Izukuan," Hatsume said dismissively, ignoring the way Izuku's face turned red again at the nickname. "We'll be working together a lot once school starts, so there's no point in pretending to be formal, don't ya think?" Izuku wasn't really sure, but he wasn't about to say otherwise and risk ruining whatever this was. "Sure thing, Mai-chan." Mai nodded and handed his portfolio back, seemingly satisfied with the nickname, and Izuku breathed a sigh of relief as he returned her portfolio. Wait, were they friends now? The only person he ever had a nickname for before was Kaken, and they'd been friends once, so did that mean that Mai was his friend? Or were they just future business partners? What were people supposed to do with their friends? Izuku suddenly felt more nervous about his new friendship with Mai than he did about the exam, which he supposed was a good thing, since distracting himself from his exam anxiety was what he'd set out to do in the first place. The background chatter in the room died down and Izuku and Mai looked toward the front of the room to see Powerloader standing on the stage holding an "Oh my goodness, it's the support hero Powerloader." Izuku couldn't help muttering, but Mai actually didn't seem to mind, something he'd have to unpack later. He's one of only a handful of heroes in Japan that has both a hero license and a support license, which means he can make his own support items, but he normally focuses on making them for, welcome, everyone, to the entrance exam. Powerloader cut off Izuku's muttering and Izuku slammed his mouth shut so he wouldn't start muttering again as the hero continued. "I'm Powerloader, the head of the support course here at UA, which should be the department you applied to. If you didn't apply to the support course, you're in the wrong place, so just leave and there's staff members at the front office who can help you find where you're supposed to be." There was an awkward shuffling for a moment as everyone looked around, but no one got up to leave, so Izuku assumed they were all in the right place. "Alright, first off is going to be the written exam, which will be taken here. Staff members will be handing out the exam as I explain a few things, so just ignore them and don't break the seal on your exam until I say you can begin. The exam is identical for all 4 courses at UA, but yours has an additional section with questions on support specifically. You'll have 3 hours. Next, you'll take the practical exam, which will be divided based on your emphasis. You'll have 4 hours to create a functional support item for the invention track or a finished costume prototype for the design track based on the prompts given. You'll turn in your portfolio when you start your practical exam." And now Izuku's anxiety was back. What was his practical exam going to be? He'd gathered that there wouldn't be many other applicants for the intelligence and analytics track, but Powerloader should have said something about it, right? Had he filled out his application incorrectly? He'd thought he checked it 5 times, but what if something went wrong? Or maybe they'd wanted him to use his intelligence gathering skills to figure out the exam before he'd arrived. A vacuum-wrapped packet was placed in front of him and Izuku forced himself to take a deep breath. It was too late to do anything about it now, and he couldn't afford to be worried about his practical exam when he hadn't even started the written one yet. It'd be fine. He could do this. All right, does everyone have your tests? Powerloader asked. Begin. Izuku didn't think that tests were normally supposed to be fun, and while his test anxiety definitely wasn't, he found himself forgetting to be nervous the more questions he answered. Even though the questions for the general section weren't extremely interesting, since they only covered the standard subjects he'd learned in middle school, they were challenging enough to make up for it. Izuku was glad that he'd studied in preparation for the test, because that meant that instead of being intimidating, the more difficult questions were actually invigorating. And then came the support section. Izuku assumed that part of its purpose was to gauge each student's potential for the other tracks, because the questions were pulled from all three. Izuku felt like he did decently well on the design questions, even if that wasn't exactly his passion, but the only questions about invention that he could even make sense of were the ones that dealt with computer hardware. Maybe he should have studied mechanics a little more. Oh well, it was too late for that now. To Izuku's surprise, there were only 2 questions about analysis and both of them were essays, so he could only hope that would be enough to show his skills and set him apart from the other applicants. He didn't want to have to think about what he'd do if his new dream got crushed like his last one had been. For the first analysis question, he was given a quirk registration form and told to their eyes about the strengths and weaknesses of the quirk, as well as give suggestions about how to use it. To his surprise, he actually recognized the quirk. It belonged to a retired hero named Glimmer who could manipulate light energy around her body in the form of sparkles. At first, it didn't seem like a very powerful quirk, but Izuku knew better. The sparkles that Glimmer controlled didn't just look pretty, they could get bright enough that looking at them was like staring into the sun. Tempting, sure, but definitely not recommended. As a pro hero, she had used it to blind and disorient her opponents, leading to a high rate of capture. The drawbacks, of course, were that if 𝐒𝐽𝐻 wasn't careful she could permanently blind villains, bystanders, or even herself. She had to carefully manipulate the light of her quirk to make sure that it was bright enough to be effective without causing permanent damage, which was a pretty fine line. She wasn't a well-known hero, but from what Izuku knew about her, she had done her job well. All of that was common knowledge, though, if someone knew where to look, so while it was necessary to list that out, Izuku didn't think that basic level of analysis would help him stand out. But what else? Well, he was supposed to give suggestions, right? It felt kind of blasphemous to give suggestions to such a successful pro hero, but Izuku forced himself to look at it like it was any other quirk. The test hadn't actually specified that the quirk belonged to a pro, after all, so he couldn't let that hold back his analysis, not to mention that if he was accepted into the support course, he'd be giving pros suggestions for a living. So how could the quirk go beyond what Glimmer had used it for? Well, she manipulated light energy, right? But Izuku's eyes widened and he started writing the ideas as fast as he could structure them out. Not all light was visible, so what if she could manipulate not only the intensity of the lights but also the wavelength? From the footage he'd seen, some of the sparkles Glimmer had used had appeared colorful, especially that one time she'd produced rainbow sparkles during a pride parade, so it was definitely possible for her to shift the wavelength within the visible spectrum. And if she could do that much, she could probably train enough to create ultraviolet light and infrared light, which meant that she could use her quirk to burn rather than blind and maybe even use it like a black light to find forensic evidence at crime scenes. In the end, Izuku's essay ended up being 3 pages long, 2 of which were entirely suggestions based on his theory that Glimmer could manipulate the wavelength of light. It really made him wonder why she'd never used it that way. It would have effectively negated a lot of the drawbacks of her quirk, since she wouldn't have had to worry about blinding anyone if her light was invisible. It would also make her much more difficult to fight, since the threats wouldn't be as obvious. It was almost a shame that she had already retired, because Izuku would have loved to see if any of his theories were actually useful. He didn't recognize the other quirk, so he didn't have the advantage of previous knowledge, but then again, he also didn't go into the analysis with any biases, so it all balanced out. It was some sort of jet quirk that allowed the user to blow air out of the bottoms of their feet, which would probably be most useful for speed or maybe even for flight, depending on how long the hero could keep continuously blowing air. They would need specialized shoes that protected their feet while still allowing the air to flow, and the rest of their costume might need extra ventilation as well, depending on where the air came from. It was probable that the quirk actually worked by taking air in through the skin to power the quirk, or maybe it was powered by the breath. If the hero could manipulate the temperature of the air, that opened a whole new field of opportunities. He could use hot air to make himself rise faster, or cool air to help victims during fire rescues. There were just so many possibilities, but Izuku limited those speculations to less than a page. He didn't know if temperature manipulation was actually within the limits of the quirk, so he didn't want to waste too much time on suggestions that might not actually be useful. Instead, Izuku tried to focus his analysis on ideas that were possible with only the information he'd been given. Beyond mobility, the quirk could probably be used to impair an opponent's vision, since if the hero could aim the jets at a villain's eyes, it would dry them out pretty quickly. It would be difficult to keep one's eyes open in a targeted windstorm, but even a brief puff to the face would force the villain to blink, which could make him a perfect counter to Eraserhead if he came up on him from behind. Izuku debated about whether he should actually include that tidbit before deciding to just leave it in. It probably wasn't necessary, but at the same time, any little bit of information could mean the difference between being accepted to his dream school or having to find a third dream in under a year, so Izuku didn't want to take any chances. It couldn't hurt, right? Unless they thought it was creepy. What if they thought he was creepy? But then again, the entire analysis section was kinda creepy, just by the way it was designed. But what if his classmates were right and his notebooks weren't useful at all and he made UA hate him because he saw too many weaknesses in the quirks they gave him? Izuku hurried and finished the essay before he could work himself into a panic about it and used the rest of the time to check his answers in the general section as a way to distract himself. He was already here, at UA, taking the entrance exam, so it was way too late to second-guess himself now, right? And maybe UA would be like Mai, who didn't think he was creepy at all, but maybe that was because Mai was a little creepy herself. By the time Power Loader announced the end of the test, Izuku had successfully talked himself down from his anxiety attack. Ectoplasm must be one of the teachers at UA, because it was his clones that came to collect everyone's tests once time was called. It was kind of surreal that there were so many real pro heroes in the building right now. Izuku hoped that, if he actually got into UA, he'd be able to rein in his inner fanboy enough to not make a fool of himself around every single one of the teachers. Oh boy, yeah, that was gonna be difficult. As soon as Ectoplasm grabbed her test, Mai was immediately back in Izuku's personal space, grinning like a madwoman. How did you do, Izuku-an? I bet those analysis questions were a piece of cake for you, here. I could make so many babies to help those heroes, it's amazing. I already have so many ideas. Maybe that's what I'll build in the practical, but I have so many other baby ideas too. Oh, this is gonna be so much fun. Izuku couldn't help smiling as Mai cackled, even if the other examinees were shooting them strange looks, but her ramblings reminded him that he still didn't know what his practical exam was going to be. Analysts didn't have anything physical to show off, unlike inventors and designers, so what were they going to ask him to do? And why didn't Power Loader mention it along with the other courses? After a few minutes, they were excused to make their way to the practical exams, and there was a flurry of movement as all the examinees stretched and gathered their things to leave the room. Izuku turned to Mai and smiled. Good luck on your practical, Mai-chan. I hope you make it in. My babies are amazing, the proctors won't be able to ignore them. Mai declared confidently. And you're not allowed to fail, either, Izuku-an. You have to make it into UA so we can make awesome babies together. Izuku sputtered and turned red, but Mai was already skipping toward the doors. He was definitely going to have to get used to the way she phrased things. Did she even realize how she sounded, or did she just not care? Honestly, from what Izuku had seen from her so far, it could be either one. Still, it was comforting to know that he'd have at least one friend if he made it into the support course. Well, one person who didn't hate him at the very least. That was gonna be weird. Izuku shook his head and grabbed his bag, then made his way to the front of the room, where Power Loader was sitting at a large desk next to the pro hero Midnight, who must have arrived sometime while they were taking the written exam. Izuku didn't want to interrupt their conversation, but he also didn't want to be late to the practical just because he didn't know where it was. There was a possibility that there were signs outside that he could follow, since that seemed to be the case for the invention and design tracks, but considering that Powerloader hadn't even mentioned the analysis track since Izuku had arrived, he wasn't willing to bet on that. Izuku hesitated another moment before speaking. He was gonna feel so stupid if they told him to just follow the signs. Excuse me. Midnight stopped halfway through whatever story she had been telling, and both heroes turned to look at Izuku, who fidgeted in place at the sudden attention. Hey, hot stuff. Midnight purred. What can we do for you? I was just wondering, Izuku grimaced. Way to make a good first impression. Do you know where the intelligence and analytics test will be? I mean, of course you know, you're in charge, it's just that you didn't say anything about it, Powerloader, sir, so I, just was kinda confused and Izuku trailed off awkwardly. The heroes seemed a little shocked, for some reason, but they didn't seem annoyed by his question, so that was something. Powerloader flipped through some papers on the desk in front of him before looking up at Izuku again. You're Izuku Midoriya, correct? Izuku nodded and the heroes shared a look that Izuku couldn't read before Powerloader turned back to him. Sorry for the confusion, Midoriya, it's just that most years, we don't actually have any applicants for that emphasis, so it's easy to forget it exists. Since you're the only one applying, it honestly slipped my mind, so I went on autopilot and gave the same spiel I give every year. Sorry. Oh. Izuku swallowed, suddenly even more insecure. I knew it wasn't as popular, but I thought there'd be at least a few others. Oh, you're so cute, I could just eat you up. Midnight cooed. Are you sure you don't want to SWCH to the design track? I'm a lot more fun than that scheming old rat. What? Izuku sputtered. T the rat. Powerloader glared at her. Sorry about her. Midnight teaches art here at UA, which puts her at the head of the design emphasis, which still doesn't give her any right to steal students from the rest of us. Midnight stuck her tongue out at him, but otherwise didn't interrupt. And most students who end up emphasizing in intelligence and analytics are recruited by Nedzu after they show potential in other courses. We're not used to people applying for analytics right off the bat. Izuku didn't know how to respond to that, so he just nodded. So, about the practical. I'll take him. Midnight squealed. We can get to know each other better. Don't you have your own practical to run? Powerloader said dryly. You'd better go before your students spread paint everywhere. I'll show Midoriya where to go. Let's be honest, if anyone is going to destroy the room, it's going to be your brats, not mine, but okay. Midnight pouted for a second, then shot Izuku a wink. Good luck, hot stuff. You're gonna need it. Ignore. Huh. Powerloader said as he stood. She's just a tease. Izuku jogged after Powerloader as they walked through the maze of hallways to wherever they were going. No one had actually said where that was yet. His mind was still reeling from the revelation that he was the only applicant for intelligence and analytics, so, should I be worried? Powerloader shrugged. I honestly don't know. Like I said, most people don't apply to this track, so I don't actually know what the practical consists of, but you wouldn't have made it this far if you didn't have some kind of skill or interest in it, so you'll probably be fine. Do the other applicants usually make it in? Izuku asked. I know there's not many, but Izuku was interrupted when a door in front of them swung open. When he glanced at Powerloader, the man looked tired, but not necessarily surprised. So Izuku turned back to the doorway, his eyes widening as he realized who exactly stood there. Hello, Midoriya. Nedzu's grin was wide enough for it to be slightly unsettling. You must be the one who was poking around my servers this morning. Izuku gaped at Nedzu, the Nedzu, principal of UA, and tried not to fanboy. He failed. Oh my goodness, you're Nedzu. One of the few animals with a quirk, although that is becoming more common as animals evolve alongside humans, but high specs gives you hyper-intelligence and, suddenly, Izuku's brain caught up with his mouth and he realized exactly what Nedzu had just said. And you caught me trying to hack UA before I even took the entrance exam. He really was an idiot, just like Kaken said, wasn't he? He was going to get kicked out of UA before he even got accepted just because he'd gotten bored and decided to do something stupid. Of course Powerloader wasn't leading him to his practical exam, he was taking him to the principal, who was going to press charges and then he'd get a permanent record and nowhere else would accept him and I'll leave him to you, then. Good luck. Power Loader said. As he turned his back to leave, Izuku could have sworn he muttered something about the end of the world, but honestly, he was too scared of what was about to happen to pay much attention. He swallowed thickly and looked at the principal, who was still grinning at him. Maybe he was just waiting for Izuku to apologize. Well, apologizing couldn't make things worse, at least. Izuku lowered himself into a deep bow. I am so sorry, Principal Nezu, sir. What I did was completely uncalled for and inappropriate. I wasn't thinking clearly and obviously that's no excuse, but, oh, there's no need for that, Midoriya. Nezu chirped. In fact, what you did was quite impressive. Izuku straightened up in shock. The principal's expression was hard to read, on account of his face not being human, but he couldn't see any anger or malice. What? You're not mad. Oh no. Nezu stepped aside and gestured for Izuku to come in. In fact, I was quite delighted. It's not often that people are brave enough to try, so it's quite fun to test my defenses against new faces. Izuku nodded numbly and sat in the chair Nezu offered him. He still couldn't believe that he wasn't in trouble, but apparently Mai had been right about him making a good first impression. Or maybe Nezu was just getting his hopes up to crush them later. It wouldn't be the first time. Nezu carefully poured the tea and set a cup down in front of Izuku. So, how long have you been hacking? I think about 8 months. Izuku took the cup and held it while he waited for it to cool. I only picked it up after I decided to apply to the support course. I thought it'd be useful for information gathering. Oh, I agree completely. Nezu chirped and took a sip of his tea. But I am surprised that you're still so new to it, considering your creativity this morning. Was applying to support a recent decision? Well, Izuku chuckled awkwardly. I thought that hero support was just inventing stuff. I didn't think to look into the analysis track until. Sorry, I'm rambling, but well, since I really enjoy analyzing heroes and quirks, it just seemed perfect, I guess. Nezu smiled knowingly. It's not often that we get young people applying to be analysts. Most people assume that support is simply invention of support items, like you did, and while analysis is an important part of creating those support items, many people overlook its potential in strategy and intelligence gathering. Speaking of your analysis, may I see your portfolio? Izuku nodded and dug the notebook out of his backpack to hand to Nezu, who eagerly started leafing through it. Izuku wondered if he was just skimming his writing or if his quirk gave him the ability to speed read. If it was the latter, then how fast could he read? Was the speed limited by his quirk or could he train himself to read even faster? If he wasn't limited by his brain, then his speed would probably be limited by how fast he could physically turn the pages, but if he was reading something that scrolled automatically, like on a computer, how would that affect the speed? I'm not as fast as all that, Midoriya. Nezu chuckled. I still have to wait for my brain to catch up before I can turn the page, and while my quirk definitely helps, most of my speed reading is actually a skill I've cultivated. Izuku flushed red and slammed his mouth shut. Sorry, I know my muttering is creepy. On the contrary, it was a wonderful demonstration of your real-time analysis skills. Nezu said simply, turning back to the portfolio, and while it will most likely be useful to learn to be aware of when you are muttering, there is nothing inherently wrong with the habit. Izuku's eyes widened and he stared at Nezu silently while he finished the portfolio. His muttering wasn't bad. That just seemed so weird to him. Kaken had always said that it was annoying and creepy, but then again, he'd said the same things about Izuku's notebooks. Maybe it was creepy if a hero did it, but was simply an eccentricity when an analyst did. That would make sense. Yeah, an eccentricity, not an annoying habit that he had to get rid of. Izuku liked that. Nezu finally turned the final page of his portfolio and set it aside. This is quite impressive. I am assuming that you have been analyzing heroes for much longer than you've been hacking. Yes, sir. Izuku said. I started analyzing heroes as a hobby when I was 4, I just didn't realize it was a marketable skill. Would it be alright if I held on to this so I can peruse it more thoroughly at a later date? 𝐻𝐻𝐻 asked. Izuku nodded, a weird sense of pride growing in his chest the more the principal praised him. I already assumed that I wasn't going to be getting it back, since it's part of my application. Excellent. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 clapped his paws together. Now, you have your laptop with you, correct? Yes. Izuku dug out his laptop and set it on the desk in front of him. Perfect. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 said. Now onto the practical portion of your exam. Izuku swallowed nervously, thinking of all the ominous good luck wishes from Midnight and Power Loader. What will I be doing exactly? As I said, I was very impressed with your efforts this morning, so I simply want you to continue what you were doing then. 𝐻𝐻𝐻's eyes twinkled with mischief. I want you to hack into UA. Izuku blinked away tears of exhaustion and frustration as he limped away from UA, sore from sitting hunched over his laptop for the past few hours. He tried everything he could think of, every backdoor, every little trick, even a hastily made virus. But by the end of the exam, Izuku had barely made it past the first round of defenses. It didn't matter how much 𝐻𝐻𝐻 had enjoyed his portfolio, or how well he'd done on the written exam, he'd completely failed the practical. What was his mom going to think? After all these months of her going out of her way to support him, would they grow apart again? Would she be disappointed in him? Where was he going to go to school? What job would even take a stupid, weak, quirkless nobody like him? Suddenly, Izuku was rammed into by somebody going full speed. Immediately, he froze and curled in on himself to try to become a smaller target. Kaken shouldn't still be here, should he? 𝐻𝐻𝐻 had left sometime during Izuku's exam to go monitor the hero course practical, and Izuku had tried to use that time to hack UA using 𝐻𝐻𝐻's computer but couldn't even crack the password. But 𝐻𝐻𝐻 had come back pretty quickly, so Kaken should already be at home by now. What if it was someone else who had learned he was quirkless and was going to beat him up and they'd never find his body and… Whoa, Izuku-an, are you okay? What's wrong? Izuku jolted from his spiraling thoughts and looked around, but the only person near him was Mai, who currently had one hand resting on his shoulder. Oh, my running into him was actually completely in character, probably. It was just Mai, not Kaken. And Mai wasn't anything like Kaken, so she wasn't going to beat him up. Probably. Izuku forced a smile onto his face. Nothing. You just startled me, is all. Mai frowned like she didn't believe him. Then what's with the tears? He tried, he really did, but he only lasted about 2 seconds before those stupid Midoriya tears were running down his face like some sort of stupid geezer. He hadn't even known this girl a full day and now he'd ruined their friendship or their partnership or whatever it was because here he was, crying in front of her and he just couldn't stop. Mai had started rubbing his shoulder sometime during his breakdown and was probably trying to be comforting. But her muttering about unleashing her babies on whoever hurt him was actually pretty intimidating. No one hurt me, Mai-chan. Izuku finally got out between the tears. It's my own fault anyway. Mai looked at him skeptically. Then what happened? That set off the tears again, but thankfully he could speak through them this time. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 wanted me to hack UA for my practical, but I couldn't do it. I failed. Oh. Mai sat down on the sidewalk and pulled him down next to her, ignoring the weird looks from the people passing by. Are you sure they didn't just want you to try? That made Izuku pause. What? Well, every failure is just a stepping stone to success, right? Mai said excitedly, and you said yourself that UA cybersecurity is absolutely insane, so what if he was planning on you failing? Izuku just stared at her. If he wanted me to fail, then why did he tell me to succeed? Mai flicked him on the forehead, which was apparently her way of getting him out of his head and telling him that he was being an idiot. A lot of inventions are just about learning the process. Even if they don't work, they still weren't a waste of time because they make the next invention faster. UA security wouldn't be the best in the business if a first year could ram through it, right? They probably just wanted to see how you approached a problem that you couldn't solve. They wanted to see your process. Izuku thought about that for a moment. It made a certain kind of sense, but then again, it seemed like everything Mai said towed the line between being reasonable and being absolutely insane, so maybe it was just that she was saying it that made it sound so believable. Still, it might make waiting for his rejection letter a little less painful, just so long as he was careful not to get his hopes up too high. If you say so, he said slowly, but what about you? How did your practical go? Mai grinned and immediately launched into a story that involved blowing up her workspace 3 times until she finally got a working prototype of hover boots 20 minutes before the end of the exam. Izuku listened and laughed with her until his tears dried and Mom started frantically texting him wondering when he was going to be home. By the time he started walking home, his heart was a little lighter than it had been, and his phone was a little heavier. It had a new number in it, after all. The letter was heavier than he expected. Well, logically, Izuku knew that the envelope was probably stuffed with all sorts of paperwork for if he was accepted, or maybe resources for if he wasn't, so it made sense for it to weigh something, but for some reason, it felt heavier than just paper. Or maybe that was an emotional reaction to the tension he'd been feeling ever since Mom had run in from getting the mail. This letter was going to determine the rest of his future. This would determine if he remained a worthless loser or if he went to All Might's alma mater to become a professional analyst, so no wonder the envelope felt so heavy. Mom hovered nervously, wringing her hands as she waited for him to open it. A few months ago, he probably would have gone to his room to be alone, but she had been just as involved in his preparation for the entrance exam as he had been, and honestly, after bombing the practical, he could really use the support. Izuku, Mom said finally. It's not going to get any easier if you wait. Izuku nodded and took a deep breath, then closed his eyes and ripped the envelope open like he was taking off a band-aid. There was a metallic thud that made Izuku open his eyes as something inside fell out and hit the coffee table. Is that a hologram projector? Almost as soon as he said that, the disc came to life and a small screen appeared. Powerloader was staring right at the camera, looking somewhat tired, which made sense if he'd had to make one of these for every student in the support course. Izuku Midoriya. Powerloader began. You passed the written exam with flying colors and turned in an impressive portfolio. However, I have been told that during the practical exam, you did not succeed in hacking UA. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes and he could feel Mom looking at him with pity as he stared at the ground. Of course he knew that he'd failed the exam. As much as he wanted to believe that Mai had been right about them not expecting him to succeed, he hadn't been able to push away the dread whenever he thought about the test. He really was a failure. He was a quirkless nobody, just like Kaken always said. I'm glad. Izuku whipped his head up fast enough to almost give him blush. Was Powerloader glad he didn't make it into UA? Was he rubbing it in? That didn't seem like appropriate behavior for a pro hero. If you had succeeded, I would honestly be concerned about the quality of our school's defenses. Powerloader chucked. Thankfully, Nedzu didn't actually expect you to succeed, he simply set the task as a way to gauge your skill and drive, even though your portfolio was impressive enough to guarantee your admittance without any need for a practical. Take it from someone who has been working under him for quite a while now, impressing Nedzu like that is no easy feat he seems to have. Powerloader shivered almost imperceptibly, special plans to help you realize your potential. Izuku held his breath as Powerloader gave a tired smile. As the head of the support course at UA, welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your support academia. Izuku's jaw dropped and he kept staring at the screen as Mom cried and hugged him tightly. He made it. He made it. He was going to UA. He did it. Oh, wait, Powerloader was still talking. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, there's a few housekeeping items I need to tell you about. There are 3 first-year support classes at UA. Classes 1F and 1G cater to the invention track, while Class 1H focuses primarily on design. Because of the rarity of students entering the intelligence and analytics track, you have been assigned to Class 1F with the invention students. Your projects and assignments will, of course, be modified to fit your emphasis, and you'll also have daily lessons with Principal Nedzu, but you will still need to pass the lab safety test on UA's website before school starts, since 1F meets in a lab rather than a traditional classroom. Please fill out the forms included with your acceptance letter to inform us of any equipment or materials you need so we can have those ready for you on the first day of class. Congratulations, Midoriya. I look forward to seeing you in my class. You did it, baby. Mom hadn't stopped hugging him since Powerloader had said he was accepted. You worked so hard. I'm so proud of you. That was what finally pushed Izuku over the edge into tears of his own. He had had no idea how much he needed to hear that. All those years of her apologizing for him being quirkless and telling him to choose a different dream were over. His mom believed in him now. She was proud of him. That felt almost as good as being told he actually got accepted into UA. Izuku. Mom said, "I think your phone is vibrating." Izuku listened and, sure enough, there was a faint vibrating noise. He looked around to see that his phone had fallen out of his pocket and was sitting on the couch beside him. Who would even be calling him? 𝐭𝐽𝐻 was the only one at school who had his number, but Izuku was half convinced he had deleted it as soon as Auntie Mitsuki had forced him to put it in his phone. Hesitantly, Izuku answered the call. "I got in." He didn't even get a chance to say hello before Mai was shouting in his ear. "I got in, Izuku-kun, I'm going to UA." Izuku couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. "Congratulations, Mai-chan. I knew you could do it." Mom looked very confused and Izuku suddenly realized that in his post-exam depressive haze, not only had he almost forgotten about giving Mai his number, he'd also completely forgotten to tell Mom that he met Mai at all. He'd been so depressed when he came home after failing the practical that he'd gone straight to his room, and then he'd spent the rest of the wait trying not to think about it, especially since he was never going to see her again if he didn't make it into UA. Now he had to explain who this random girl was to his mom. Awkward. He pulled the phone away from his mouth and spoke quietly. Mai-chan is, well, Mai was acting like they were friends, but he still didn't want to assume anything. "We met at the entrance exam." "Ah," Mom nodded in understanding, but still seemed a little nervous. "What about you, Izuku-kun?" The question made Izuku tune back into Mai's ramblings. "Did you pass? Because if you didn't, I'm gonna march straight into UA and tell them that." "No," Izuku screamed, but then realized that could be taken the wrong way. "I mean, no, please don't do that, Mai-chan. I got in. Apparently, my final was just a formality and they didn't actually expect me to succeed." "I told you so." Mai cackled. "I knew they wouldn't fail you. That would be like ignoring my perfect babies. So what class are you gonna be in? Are you gonna be with all the other analysis students?" Actually, I'm the only one, so they put me in an invention class." Izuku said nervously, "I'm in 1F. There was a beat of silence and Izuku was just starting to wonder if he'd somehow said something wrong when Hatsune squealed so loud that he had to hold the phone at arm's length just to avoid going deaf. Mom kept looking between him and the phone, obviously concerned. Is she okay?" Izuku shrugged helplessly. "I think she might just be excited." "I'm in 1F too." Mai screamed. "We're in the same class." Izuku blinked in shock for a moment. He was going to have a friend in class. That hadn't happened since. Well, it depended on if he was counting 𝐭𝐽𝐻 as a friend. They'd been in plenty of classes together, but it definitely wasn't enjoyable, or at least not as enjoyable as thought being in a class with Mai would be, so he wasn't sure if that counted. Izuku grinned. He was finally going to be in the same class as a friend. Well, if they were actually friends. "We should do something to celebrate," Mai declared. Oh. Izuku held the phone away from his mouth again and glanced at Mom. Would you mind if I went to hang out with Mai-chan? She wants to celebrate us getting in." Mom frowned for a moment. "Does she want to come over for dinner? If she's your friend, I want to meet her. I could make your favorites." Izuku hesitated. Was inviting her over weird? He couldn't imagine inviting anyone from his middle school over, and 𝐭𝐽𝐻 would probably laugh at Mom insisting she meet his new friend, but Mai didn't seem like the type to get embarrassed by societal norms like that, so she probably wouldn't care. "I guess I can ask her." 20 minutes later, Izuku was frantically cleaning the kitchen while Mom started dinner. What if Mai thought their house was too dirty? What if she thought it was in a bad part of town? What if she saw the pictures of 4-year-old Izuku in an all-night odyssey and never wanted to talk to him again? They were in the same class, he'd have to be careful to always sit on the other side of the room, or maybe behind her so she didn't have to see his face. Was it safer to take the pictures down? Yes, definitely safer to take the pictures down. Oh no, that was a knock. Too late. Abort mission. They both ran to answer the door, but before Mom could open it, Izuku suddenly grabbed her hand. Before you meet I kinda need to warn you about something. Mom looked worried. Does she have tattoos or something? No, nothing like that. Izuku said frantically. It's just, she calls her inventions her babies. Why would you need to warn me about? Izuku opened the door before she could finish and immediately got an armful of excitable my-chan, Izuku-an. This year is gonna be so much fun. Izuku willed his face to go back to a normal color as he pried her away from him. This is my mom. Mom, this is my-chan. Mai's eyes lit up and she ran up to Mom, practically vibrating with excitement. It's awesome to meet you, Midoriya-san. Your son and I are gonna make so many appealing babies together. Mom immediately choked and stared at her in shock before she connected the dots. She visually relaxed and sighed in relief. Oh, that's what you meant, Izuku. I see why you warned me. And yes, Izuku seems to be looking forward to working with you too. Good. Mai grinned. I'm so excited to see what babies I can make with your son's awesome brains. Did you teach him how to do that? Mom still seemed a little overwhelmed by Mai's energy. What? I think she means my analysis, Mom. Izuku came to her rescue, or did you mean the hacking? Both. Oh, analysis has always been Izuku's hobby, really. Even as a kid, he was looking at quirks and writing notes about them. I didn't even know what he was doing until he showed me his first notebook. Mom said. And besides buying him notebooks and computer classes, it's all him. Wow, Mai said, I knew you were smart, Izuku-an, but that's something else. You really taught yourself how to make your notebooks. Izuku nodded. I just always loved heroes, so it just kinda made sense. I've been doing them forever, so the first ones are really stupid and I think they're probably written in crayon. Cool, my first blueprints were the same. I knew they were blueprints, so I was very particular that I had to draw them with blue crayon. Mai grinned and Izuku was pleased to realize that Mom looked more at ease now that she'd had a chance to adjust to Mai's energy. So what's for dinner? Bakugo Katsuki and Izuku Midoriya, please report to the principal's office. Bakugo Katsuki and Izuku Midoriya. Izuku froze in his seat as the classroom exploded in whispers at the announcement. He hesitantly looked over at Kaken, but whipped his head down to look at the floor the second he saw the death glare that Kaken was leveling at him. Why were they being called down to the office? And together? Was this about? No, it couldn't be about the teasing. They'd never done anything about it before, so there wasn't any reason for them to do something now, especially now that Kaken had gotten into UA's hero course. So that meant that Izuku was probably in trouble for something, but what? And why would Kaken have to come too? Izuku gathered his things and walked out into the hall, careful to keep a few steps behind Kaken so he didn't think Izuku was trying to get ahead of him. Unfortunately, his efforts to not make Kaken angry were in vain, because as soon as they'd turned the corner, Izuku found himself being slammed against the wall. What is this about, Deku? Kaken growled. What did you do? I don't know, I swear. Izuku held his bag securely against his chest so Kaken couldn't grab it, his eyes flicking down to the smoke billowing from his hand. Let's just go, we probably shouldn't keep the principal waiting. Kaken clicked his tongue dismissively, but released his hold on Izuku and kept walking toward the principal's office. Izuku took a deep breath to steady himself before hurrying after him, leaving a larger gap between them this time so he'd have a bit more warning if Kaken decided to confront him again. When they got to the office, Kaken knocked on the door and shot a warning glare back at Izuku before the door swung open. The principal was a man who really seemed too young to be balding, but that didn't stop him. Izuku had been to his office a few times in the past, none of which had necessarily been pleasant, so the smile on the principal's face didn't do anything to put him at ease. In fact, it made the whole thing more unsettling, because Izuku honestly couldn't think of a single reason why he'd be called down to the office if he wasn't in trouble. I just wanted to be the first person from our school to congratulate the both of you. The principal said. I can't believe we have not one, but 2 students from our school will be attending UA. And to think you're one of them, Midoriya. It's honestly a miracle. Izuku gulped as he felt the heat of Kaken's glare on him. Or maybe it was literal heat. Had Kaken activated his quirk? He wouldn't do that in the principal's office, would he? Would the principal let him get away with it? He didn't know why he'd assumed he'd be lucky enough to not have anyone at his middle school know he'd made it into UA. It had been so nice these past months with nobody knowing about his new dream, but of course 𝐎𝐪𝐽𝐻𝑆 had to have been sent their exam results. He'd been even more of an idiot for somehow not preparing for the eventuality of 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 finding out. They were going to be attending the same high school, they'd run into each other eventually, even if they were in different courses. Well, there was nothing he could do about any of that now. Izuku forced a shaky smile onto his face. "Thank you, sir. I hope we'll make you proud." The principal nodded and gestured for them to leave. Izuku stood awkwardly for a second, waiting for 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 to leave first, but he just kept glaring at him until Izuku finally gave in and scurried toward the door. He just wanted to go back to class and pretend that the principal hadn't known exactly what he was doing by calling both of them into the office at the same time. He wanted to pretend that his new dream was still safe. He wanted to pretend that 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 was like Mai and was excited that they'd be going to the same school, rather than enraged. Instead, reality grabbed him roughly by the arm and dragged him outside, taking him straight to an alcove behind the locker rooms that didn't have any cameras. At this time of day, even if 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 let loose explosions, no one would be on the other side to hear them, which also meant that no one would be around to hear Izuku's screams. Not that they'd help him if they did hear, but it was the principle of the thing. Izuku couldn't hold back a sharp cry as he was shoved against the wall for the second time in 10 minutes. 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 glared down at him, and this time Izuku knew that the heat wasn't just from his glare as he felt the skin on his chest blistering where 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻's hand was holding his shirt. "I thought you'd given up on being a hero, nerd." Izuku trembled as he realized he'd never actually seen 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 this angry before. This was bad. Even worse than usual. What would happen if 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 killed him? Would they give his place at UA to someone else? Would Mai find someone else to make inventions with? Would anyone even notice he was gone? "I bet you've had a great time laughing behind my back these past couple of months, haven't you?" 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 sneered. "Pretending to have given up, when really you were lying to us the whole time. How'd you even pass the exam, you DMN nerd?" Izuku hissed in pain as 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 let loose an explosion to his chest. "I was supposed to be the first and only student from this crappy school to make it into UA, and you had to go and ruin it." 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻 yelled. "Well, I hope your fun was worth it, because it's over Deku. I don't care if you somehow cheated and made it into UA, you're not gonna be a hero." "I'm in the support course, 𝐭𝐿𝐴𝐻." Izuku yelled. He was trembling from the pain, the anxiety, and now the emotional exertion it took to yell at his oldest friend. "I didn't lie to you, 𝐭𝐻. Katsuki. I gave up on being a hero months ago. I didn't even try the hero course exam like you did, so don't get angry at me for chasing a dream that doesn't even affect you." He grabbed the arm that was holding him against the wall and shoved it away, then ran as fast as he could away from the school. He'd undoubtedly get in trouble for skipping class, but they wouldn't risk suspending him or punishing him too drastically now that he'd be attending UA. They wanted the positive attention too badly for that. Maybe that was why they'd let Katsuki get away with everything they did, because he was the student with the greatest chance of making it big. Izuku could hardly see through his tears as he ran home on autopilot, shooting a text to Mai for her to call him when she had a minute. He didn't know what he'd say if she called, There were too many emotions for him to process alone. Thankfully, Mom was at work, so he didn't have to worry about her seeing him barge through the door with tears running down his face as he went straight to the bathroom to bandage the ugly burn on his chest. To his surprise, Izuku's phone rang just as he was about to take off his uniform. He looked at the screen to see Mai's name on caller ID. "Shouldn't you be in class right now? I told the teacher that I'd accidentally added an unstable component to my cell phone battery and it was going to explode if I didn't answer a call right away." Mai said. "I've actually done that before, so they didn't question it." "You've actually blown up your phone by accident?" Izuku asked numbly. "It wasn't a very large explosion." Mai dismissed. "But what's going on? Your text sounded really upset and now your voice is doing that weird choky thing it does when you've been crying." Izuku tried to hold back a sob, but it tore itself out of his chest anyway. "Everyone at school found out I'm going to UA." There was a beat of silence at the other end, Isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't they be happy for you? No, you don't understand, I'm quirkless. Izuku yelled, then immediately felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head as he realized what he'd just said. He hadn't meant for her to know that. He hadn't. And he'd been looking forward to having a friend. I'm sorry. I'll just let you go, you didn't need to leave class and you don't have to call me again, I'm sorry. Oh no. Izuku 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲, don't you dare hang up on me. Izuku stopped with his thumb halfway to the end call button. Did you just use Hacker as my middle name? Well, I don't know your real one, and I needed a placeholder to get the full effect. Mai explained. So, Izuku 𝐒𝐭𝐴, don't you dare think that I'm gonna abandon all the amazing babies we're gonna make together, just because you have some extra toe joint or whatever. I know for a fact that you're smarter than that, so I don't want to hear it. Izuku's jaw dropped and he gaped at his reflection in the mirror. What? You're still talking to me? Obviously. Mai huffed. So did one of your bullies get mad because you made it in? Izuku put his phone on speaker so he could focus on treating his burn. I don't know if bully's the right word. We used to be best friends, so it sounds so wrong to call him anything other than that, but... Well, we haven't really hung out since his quirk came in, so that was 10 years ago, Izuku-an. Mai said bluntly. What? That was 10 years ago. Mai repeated. If you haven't hung out in 10 years, you're not still friends. Did he hurt you? Izuku hissed in pain as his shirt pulled away from the burned skin. Today. Mai made a little exasperated noise. Ever. Izuku looked at the angry red burn in the mirror. Define hurt. Mai groaned. For someone who is so smart, you really are an idiot. Are you in pain right now? If I say no, are you going to believe me? Not a chance in hell, Izuku-an. Izuku grimaced. Then yes. Mai sighed. I'm gonna kill him. He did that just because you got into UA and he didn't. Oh no, he got in too. Izuku ran a washcloth under cold water. He's in the hero course, that's part of why he's so angry. They let your bully into the hero course. Mai yelled so loudly that the audio on the phone crackled. Like I said, bully isn't really the right word. Just because you were friends once doesn't mean he's not a bully, Izuku-an. Mai said, then continued more quietly. It also doesn't mean you deserved it. Izuku's hands stuttered to a stop from where he'd been gently patting the washcloth to his chest. What? You don't deserve the way he treats you, Izuku-an. Mai said. What's his excuse? That you don't have a quirk. Not your fault. Try again. Izuku thought for a moment. Until about a year ago, I still wanted to be a hero despite that. Not a crime. Mai said. Tons of kids want to be heroes. Try again. Izuku was starting to smile in spite of himself. I kept complimenting his quirk, which he somehow interpreted as me thinking I was better than him. I'm not even gonna try, this guy's an idiot. Next. Izuku laughed. I kept following him around like a lost puppy. Anyone would be lucky to have your brilliant mind behind them. Mai said. Any other complaints? Izuku hesitated. He knew that it'd probably make Mai laugh, but it felt almost blasphemous to say, here's a PP. Ding. 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 Mai cackled. We have a winner. For real, though, Izuku-an, that guy is a JRK and if he ever comes to me for babies I'll. Izuku wasn't sure he actually wanted to know. You'll what? I'll use cheap materials. Mai blurted. No, I can't do that, my babies deserve only the best. I'll figure it out, but it won't be pretty. Izuku laughed. Thanks, Mai, that means a lot. So, are you feeling any better? Izuku shrugged as he spread burn cream on his chest. It was definitely going to scar, I don't know. I just wish he hadn't taken it so personally, you know. I wasn't even trying to get into the hero course. Izuku's sadness had slowly been pushed away by Mai's enthusiasm, and it was quickly being replaced by something he wasn't used to letting himself feel. Anger. Couldn't he just let me have this one thing without ruining it? Izuku ranted. I mean, he already made sure I knew my last dream was a big fat pile of nothing, so couldn't he just be happy with that? No. He has to ruin my new one too. Then don't let him. Mai said. It's your dream, not his, so that bully doesn't get any say. You're gonna be an amazing support analyst, Izuku, and he can't do a thing about it. Izuku finished wrapping the bandages around his chest and grabbed the phone as he headed to his room to pick out a t-shirt. I don't know. It feels like he can. I know, Mai said. But, hey. Now you have me, and we're friends, and I'm not gonna let you give up. We're gonna take UA by storm and that guy is gonna regret ever hurting you, okay? Izuku chucked. Okay. Good. Mai said resolutely. Now, did you find anything else out about that jet quirk from the exam? My hoverboot babies are having problems staying in the air. Izuku did his best to stare straight ahead and not give in to the temptation to hunch his shoulders in an attempt to make himself a smaller target. As he predicted, the news that he got into UA had spread like wildfire since yesterday, though Izuku didn't know if that was Katsuki's fault or the principal's. The moment he'd arrived, Izuku had felt dozens of eyes on him, and even now after half a day, his classmates just wouldn't stop staring. Some seemed angry, like Katsuki, but most simply thought he was lying for attention. Worthless Deku. He's just gonna drag you down. Do you actually think he got in? Someone in my science class said it'd be possible to forge an acceptance letter if you were stupid enough to try. Even if he did get in, it's not like he's gonna stay there, right? UA is for the best and the brightest, so I bet they'll expel Deku on the first day. Izuku actually kind of wished they'd actually say what they wanted to his face instead of whispering it as he walked by. It wasn't like they didn't know he could hear him, so really, it'd just be easier if they were upfront about it, if only so Izuku didn't have to feign ignorance. Maybe part of the reason Mai was so easy to be friends with was because she was so upfront about things. She might have a weird way of saying things, but Izuku was almost certain that she'd never lie to him, even to spare his feelings. If he asked her, she'd most likely say something about incorrect data making for bad inventions, but at least Izuku could trust her. Probably. Izuku sighed in relief as he walked out the front doors, grateful to finally be away from his classmates. It was only a couple more days until the end of the school year, and then he'd start UA with Mai, so he could handle it until then. He could handle it. He'd already gone through so much worse. He didn't run into any hero fights on his way home, so maybe he wasn't paying as much attention to his surroundings as he should have been, and it came as a surprise to him when he turned a corner only to see Katsuki leaning against the wall, backed by two of his cronies. When Katsuki saw him, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't explode. Izuku froze momentarily before forcing himself to relax. It wasn't his fault that Katsuki was mean, he just had to keep reminding himself of that. Katsuki pushed himself off the wall and glowered at Izuku. Where the F did you go yesterday, you dimmin' nerd? Izuku did his best to channel his inner Mai as he responded, I went home, Katsuki. That tends to happen after one gets cornered behind the school, but of course, you wouldn't know a thing about that, would you? He was prepared to dart away the moment Katsuki's cronies gave him an opening, but they were flanking him on either side and Katsuki himself was blocking his way forward. Izuku had been expecting him to explode at his last comment, but to his surprise, Katsuki was quiet. It was terrifying. Izuku knew how to deal with a screaming Katsuki, he even knew how to deal with an exploding Katsuki, even if that almost always ended up with him getting hurt, but this was new. It wasn't that Katsuki wasn't angry, but that anger was simmering beneath the surface in a type of cold rage and some other emotion Izuku couldn't place. Maybe confusion. Was Katsuki confused about Izuku talking back to him? Or maybe he didn't understand why he'd gone home yesterday. There wasn't much point in thinking about it right now, because ultimately, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Izuku got away from here before he got hurt again. Well, Izuku forced a wobbly smile onto his face, trying his best to imitate Mai's confidence. If that's all you wanted to ask me, then we should all probably be getting home. Katsuki looked at him intensely for a moment before scoffing, so, are you some sort of shitty inventor now or something? It took Izuku a moment to realize that Katsuki was talking about the support course. Of course, he'd made the same assumption that Izuku had at first, but he didn't really know if it was smart to let Katsuki know anything more than he had to about his new dream. What's it to you? You're going to be a hero, Katsuki. I'm not. Isn't that good enough for you? I told you not to apply. Katsuki growled. Izuku felt a swell of anger and recognized the feeling from his phone call with Mai yesterday. It wasn't his fault that Katsuki was a 𝐎𝐻𝐽𝐽, so it wasn't his responsibility to avoid setting him off. I'm not one of your cronies, Katsuki. You don't control me. A few small explosions popped in Katsuki's hand, but instead of being afraid, all Izuku could think about was the fact that Mai had apparently accidentally blown up her phone at least once. Hope mingled itself with the anger. Maybe if he hung around her enough, explosions would take on a different meaning. Maybe eventually, he'd come to associate them with friendship and acceptance, rather than disappointment and pain. Izuku squared his shoulders. Katsuki, what the F is up with that, Deku? Katsuki interrupted. Why the hell are you calling me Katsuki all of a sudden? I thought you were still using that stupid nickname. Izuku took a step back. For some reason, he hadn't realized that Katsuki would even notice the change. He was just a pebble on the side of Katsuki's road to greatness, so what did it even matter what Izuku called him? But apparently, nothing that Katsuki did made sense. He was angry when Izuku called him Kaken, and he was angry when he didn't. There was no way for Izuku to win, and honestly, he was sick of trying. People have nicknames for their friends, Katsuki. Izuku said lowly. And we're not friends anymore. Katsuki glared at him, but Izuku held his ground. He wasn't going to look away first. He wasn't going to let Katsuki win this one. Eventually, Katsuki scoffed and stepped aside. Whatever, Deku. Like I care what you do. Izuku gripped the straps of his backpack and walked past him, tense as he anticipated an attack from behind. Katsuki, however, seemed just as tense. He might be pretending like he didn't care and that was why he was letting this go, but Izuku knew the truth. He had won. It filled him with an unfamiliar sense of victory and accomplishment that he'd only ever experienced when analyzing or hacking. It gave him the confidence to stop walking a few steps past Katsuki and turn around. Maybe it was petty and more than a little stupid, but Izuku wanted the last word. Oh, and Katsuki. Izuku smiled slightly as they made direct eye contact. I'm not going to be a shitty inventor. I'm going to be a shitty analyst. Turns out, some people actually like my creepy stalker notebooks. He turned and started walking away, promising himself that he'd have a panic attack when he got home. See you at you, Katsuki. Katsuki didn't follow him. Izuku tugged at the knot of his tie again, trying to get it to vaguely resemble a triangle at the very least, and tried to ignore Katsuki, who was glaring at him from the other end of the train. It was just his luck that they'd left at the same time and ended up in the same car, but from the map of UA he'd been sent alongside his acceptance letter. The support classes were in an entirely different part of the building than the hero courses, so they would have to head in separate directions almost as soon as they arrived, and then he could meet up with Mai. Easy as pie. Even though he'd already been there for the entrance exams, walking into UA as a student was an overwhelming experience. He hadn't even realized he'd stopped just outside the door until Katsuki roughly shoulder-checked him, knocking him over the threshold. Stay out of my way, Deku. Izuku instinctively tensed, wondering if Katsuki had finally had enough of his new attitude and he was actually going to die before classes even started, but Katsuki just walked away, not even sparing Izuku a backward glance as he headed toward the hero course. He supposed that even Katsuki wasn't overconfident enough to attack him in the halls of the best hero school in Japan, where a pro hero could walk around the corner at any minute. Still, Izuku would have to start leaving earlier if he wanted to avoid being jumped outside the gates. As soon as Katsuki was finally out of sight, Izuku let out a breath of relief and walked in the opposite direction, relying on the map he'd memorized to find his way to Class 1F. The school was a little like a maze and Izuku wondered how much of that was intentional. It must make it more difficult for villains to find their way around if they ever got inside, or maybe Nezu had just remodeled the school this way to get some petty revenge on humans and let them know what running a maze felt like. Honestly, it was probably both. Eventually, Izuku found the correct hallway and was met with an armful of Mai as soon as he turned the corner. Why are our teachers so cruel, Izuku-an? Mai sobbed into his shoulder. Izuku's mind started racing. Were the teachers here going to be like the ones at 𝐎𝐪𝙢? He'd just assumed that they'd be kinder because they were pro-heroes and were supposed to save people, but what if they were just as bad? No, they'd be worse because they had more training. Before his brain could even fully process those thoughts, Mai started speaking again. They locked the lab and won't let us in until the teacher gets here. Why, Izuku-an? I need to make my babies. Izuku practically melted in relief. Their teachers weren't actually cruel. It was just Mai being Mai. Not that her outrage didn't make sense. It just wasn't as objectively bad as what Izuku had been thinking. The lab being locked might be an inconvenience, but it wouldn't feel like the end of the world to anyone else besides her. Mai, it's the first day. Izuku reminded her gently, and don't pretend that you wouldn't just blow something up if you were allowed in right now. It's part of my process, Izuku-an. Mai insisted. You can't have success without a little failure. Maybe so, Izuku said patiently, but it still makes sense for them to want to supervise us until they know we can handle ourselves. She pouted at that, but relented and pulled him by the wrist to sit on the hallway floor next to a few other kids who must be their future classmates. They'd been staring, something Izuku was sure he'd get more used to the longer he hung out with Mai, but they quickly looked away when they noticed him glancing their way. Mai pulled out a sketchbook and started sketching out diagrams for her latest invention while Izuku immediately took advantage of the time to analyze their classmates' quirks, or at least those that were obvious from a glance, which surprisingly wasn't that many. There were only 2 students with obvious mutations and the rest looked normal, but Izuku supposed that less obvious mutations, like the crosshairs in Mai's eyes, might not be easy to see unless he actually had a conversation with them and had an opportunity to get up close and personal. Of the 2 with mutation quirks, one had a mutation similar to gang orca but with head of a great white shark rather than a killer whale, and the other had large pointed ears and a bald head, though Izuku didn't know if the baldness was quirk-related or a stylistic choice. Wait a second, he didn't have eyebrows either, which meant that it was most likely due to his quirk. Izuku-an, you're muttering again. Mai said distractedly. Izuku jolted and realized that the kid with the pointed ears was blushing and the rest of the class was looking at him nervously. Oh, Izuku smiled awkwardly at the kid. Sorry. I'm, trying to be more aware of when I'm doing that. But I would be interested, if you want to tell me. The kid looked like he really didn't, but also didn't know how to say no. I just have alopecia. I don't think it's linked to my quirk, but it might be, since a couple other people in my family have it too, and we all have similar quirks. He trailed off, and as much as Izuku wanted to ask what his quirk was, he didn't want their classmates to think he was creepy. Actually, it was probably too late for that, since the rest of the students in the hallway already seemed to be avoiding him and Mai. Still, the kid probably didn't feel comfortable telling Izuku his quirk, so he shouldn't press the issue. It would most likely come up eventually anyway, since most classes shared their name and quirk on the first day, something that he wasn't looking forward to at all. At least he wouldn't lose any friends when it came out that he was quirkless. Izuku-an, Mai asked suddenly, did you see that 𝐭𝐴𝐻 fight yesterday? Izuku nodded eagerly, grateful for the distraction. It was against that tortoise villain, right? Yep. Mai confirmed. So, what did you think? He thought for a moment. Well, it wasn't a good matchup, at least not with how the 2 currently fight. 𝐭𝐴𝐻's strengths are speed and capture, so Shellshock's natural slowness put him at a huge disadvantage. It could have gone a lot differently though. His shell is hard enough that physical attacks are useless against it, not that that would have helped against 𝐭𝐴𝐻's lacquered chain prison, but if he had thought to use his shell as a bludgeoning weapon, he probably could have broken out of even that trap fairly easily. One of 𝐭𝐴𝐻's major weaknesses is how soft his wood is, since it has to grow so fast. Mai grinned and wrote something down. What do you think of turtle shell armor? Izuku grimaced and shook his head. Too heavy. There's a reason why tortoises are so slow. Turtles, however, can move pretty quickly in water, so the idea might be more practical for a water combat hero like 𝐶𝐿𝐾. And if there are air chambers to help with buoyancy, the armor won't sink even if it's heavy. Mai brainstormed happily. She scribbled out some of the things she'd already written down and turned to a new page of her sketchbook. They spent the rest of their wait discussing various hero fights Izuku had seen that week and discussing how to mimic the strengths or cover their weaknesses of both the heroes and villains. Izuku was vaguely aware of their classmates discreetly edging away from them, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Katsuki and their old classmates had already made it wonderfully clear how creepy his notebooks were, but Izuku was at UA to become the best analyst he could be, so he wasn't about to let some judgmental classmates hold him back. He was honestly just lucky that Mai had sat next to him at the exams. He probably still would have met her, since they were in the same class and everything, but he would have been about 1,000 times more nervous. The bell rang right as Power Loader rounded the corner. Mai immediately shoved her sketchbook into Izuku's hands and jumped to her feet, running up to their new homeroom teacher so quickly that she almost ran into him. "Are you gonna open the lab now? Can we get straight to work? When can I start making my babies?" Power Loader took a step back in shock, but then sighed in resignation, making Izuku giggle softly. He must have gotten a taste of Mai's antics during the invention practical, which must have been a total nightmare because he knew for a fact that Mai had caused at least one explosion during the test. "Poor guy. Hatsune, please calm down," Power Loader pleaded. "And yes, we'll be going in the room in a few minutes, but I have some things to explain first." Mai looked like she was about to argue, so Izuku stood up and tugged on her arm. "Come on, just be patient a little longer, okay Mai-chan?" Mai pouted and plopped down on the floor again. "Okay, but if he takes too long, I'm picking the lock, okay?" Power Loader already looked done. "It's an electronic lock. You can't get in without a passcode. I'll just have Izuku hack it then. It'll take longer to hack the keypad than to listen to Power Loader." Izuku turned to their teacher. "I'm sorry about her, she's just been really looking forward to this." "It's fine." Power Loader sighed. "Okay, so for the rest of you, thanks for your patience. You all know me from the entrance exam, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself again anyway. I'm Power Loader, your homeroom teacher, and I am also the head of the support department here at UA. Yes, this includes all three emphases, though design and analysis each have a teacher that has responsibility for those students specifically." "Who are they?" a girl with brown curly hair asked. "Midnight's in charge of the design track," Izuku said. He remembered that much from their brief conversation as they were taking him to Nedzu's office. "As for analysis, I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure it's Nedzu himself, right? I feel sorry for whoever's in the analysis track." The kid with the shark head shivered. "I've heard Nedzu's a total monster." Izuku frowned. He hadn't really talked to Nedzu that much, since he'd been more focused on trying to hack UA, but from their brief interaction, he hadn't seemed like a monster at all. If anything, he was just looking for some entertainment, since being so intelligent meant he got bored more quickly. He had heard that Nedzu could be a little scary, but so far, Izuku didn't see any reason to be afraid of him. "Can everyone just shut up so we can get this over with and get into the lab?" Mai complained loudly. Power Loader cleared his throat. Yes, of course. I'm sure you remember that we asked each of you what tools and materials you wanted, correct? Well, we've included those items in your personalized workstations. When you enter the lab, find the table with the tools you ordered. There's also a nameplate on each desk to make it easier and prevent confusion. We have to go to the opening ceremony in 20 minutes, but that time is yours to get familiar with the space and set up your station the way you like it. You've all already passed the lab safety test, but please be aware that if you are caught engaging in unsafe lab procedures, you will receive detention and a ban from the lab until you have demonstrated that you are willing to follow the rules." Power Loader looked at Mai as he said that last part, and Izuku had to hold back a laugh. Mai would never do anything to jeopardize her lab access. She would, however, bend the rules as far as they could go and use every loophole to her advantage, and Izuku would probably get dragged into helping her. So maybe the entrance exam hadn't been quite long enough for Power Loader to get to know her particular brand of idiosyncrasies after all. Oh well, he'd figure her out eventually. Power Loader entered the access code and Mai rushed past him the second the door was open, while Izuku followed with the rest of the class at a more sedate pace. The lab was large, with about 10 large workbenches that acted as desks. Support classes tended to be a little smaller than the average class because of the space and supervision needed, But Izuku didn't mind having fewer classmates. It just meant that there were fewer people to make fun of him. Mai was already elbows deep in her new tools, practically drooling as she pulled them from their boxes and started testing them out. Izuku simply chuckled and left her to it, since she probably wouldn't hear him if he started talking to her now anyway, and started looking for his own workspace. He had the feeling that most of his classmates were finding their tables primarily based on the unique tools they'd requested, but Izuku hadn't really known what to ask for. He was an analyst, not an inventor, so all he really needed was a computer with internet access and maybe some notebooks. He'd said as much in the request forms, but made sure to tell them that he already had his laptop and that he was more than used to buying his own notebooks, so they didn't have to go out of their way for him. Which meant that Izuku was looking for a mostly empty workbench. He walked around the room, watching as some of his classmates started finding their assigned areas, but every single one of the tables he could see was cluttered with tools and boxes. Maybe they just had too much stuff and had put some boxes on his table to keep them off the floor. That'd make sense. It wasn't as though Izuku needed a lot of space to do his thing anyway, since he was used to doing it running down the street while chasing hero fights. He was just glad to be useful, even if that usefulness was just lending some much-needed table space. So that meant that he'd have to rely on the little nameplates. He didn't want to bother anyone, so he went over to Mai's table so he knew what the nameplates looked like, since she wouldn't notice him, and if she did, she wouldn't care. They were actually really nice, not that he expected anything less than the best from UA, but they each looked like engraved brass and had been screwed onto the table so they wouldn't fall off even if there were a strong breeze or, in Mai's case, an explosion. That was probably smart. Izuku walked around the room again, checking the nameplates on each of the tables that didn't have someone there already, only to come up empty. Powerloader had said Izuku was in class 1F, hadn't he? Had they changed his assignment at the last minute? What if they'd sent him an email and Izuku had missed it? What if they had just decided that he didn't need a desk? What if they decided to not let him into UA after all? Izuku shook his head and forced himself to take a deep breath. If they had decided to rescind his acceptance, the student ID they'd sent him wouldn't have let him pass the gate this morning. So he was still a student of UA and didn't have to worry about that, but he still had to find his desk. Maybe he should ask Powerloader. But he didn't want to bother him, and what if he realized how stupid Izuku was when he realized he couldn't even find his own desk and decided to expel him on the spot? It wouldn't hurt to do one more walk around the room and look at all the name tags again, right? Maybe he just missed something, maybe. Who the F is Izuku Midoriya and why does he need a whole butt room? Izuku whirled around to look at the girl with brown curls, which now that he was thinking about it looked a lot like wire. Could that be her quirk? No, he couldn't get distracted by quirks right now. Anyway, she was the one who'd called out and gotten his attention. Actually, she'd gotten the attention of the whole class. Even Mai was looking over at her. Wait, did she say room? Izuku practically ran over to where the girl was gesturing to a door that was marked with the same nameplate as each of the desks, and sure enough, that was his name engraved on the metal. Izuku pushed past the girl, realizing too late that that was probably really rude, and rushed into the room, his room. The lights were off, but the room was illuminated by at least 5 monitors that Izuku could see, one of which was a giant flat screen that was mounted to the wall above the desk. There was a giant bookshelf against one of the side walls that was filled with notebooks, and Izuku's fingers twitched as he thought about filling all of them. He heard a whistle behind him, but couldn't pull his eyes away from the setup as Mai came up to stand beside him. Wow, Hakakun, you doesn't do anything halfway, do they? Please tell me I'm not dreaming, Mai-chan. Izuku said breathlessly. I didn't even request any of this. Yeah, sorry about that, Nezu went a little overboard. Izuku turned to see Powerloader leaning against the doorframe as the other students either crowded around him or looked in the windows that Izuku hadn't noticed that looked into the rest of the lab. Powerloader was smiling slightly, though it could have been in embarrassment or amusement at Izuku's reaction. Everyone, this is Izuku Midoriya, the only first year in the analysis track and Nezu's personal student. Powerloader introduced. It's been so long since Nezu has had an analysis student that he got a little too excited and insisted on designing your workspace himself. This used to be a testing room, there are a few others on either side of you, but this way you won't be distracted by the noise of the lab or worried about lab accidents damaging your computers. Powerloader shot a pointed look at Mai, who ignored him in favor of grabbing Izuku's arm and jumping up and down. This is awesome, Izuku-kun. Just imagine everything you'll be able to do with all these hacking babies. Izuku nodded, then remembered his manners and bowed to Powerloader. Thank you. I'll do my best to put it to good use. Powerloader nodded and smiled as he left. Mai gave his arm a reassuring squeeze before running back out of the room to her own workspace, and Izuku noted with relief that he had a clear view of her desk from his windows. He didn't know why that was so reassuring, but it was probably because she was his only friend and he didn't want to feel alone again. The other students each looked at Izuku curiously before they too turned back to their own workspaces. And he hoped that they wouldn't find him quite as creepy as they had before, now that they had a wall separating them and knew that he was supposed to be analyzing everything. Izuku reverently sat down at the desk and started to familiarize himself with the computers. He had a feeling this was going to be a good year. The opening ceremonies were interesting, for lack of a better word. Izuku didn't see Katsuki anywhere, which was honestly a good thing, but it was still kind of worrying. While Izuku wouldn't put it beyond him to just skip the assembly and hang out behind the dumpsters or something, he didn't think Katsuki would pull something like that on the first day. Oh well, if he made a poor first impression, then that wasn't Izuku's problem. The general muttering of the students died down and Izuku turned to the stage to see President MIC striding out onto the stage. Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? To Izuku's surprise, President MIC's enthusiasm was met with a general non-response. He didn't know why. This was President MIC, the voice hero. He had his own radio show and everything. Midoriya. One of his classmates, the bald one, said softly, "Are you aware that you're mumbling again?" Izuku slammed his mouth shut and blushed. Sorry. I'll try to stop. You all idiots." The curly-haired girl leaned over Mai's lap and shoved a pencil in his face. Izuku took it hesitantly, not wanting to be rude. Thank you, but... Why? She rolled her eyes. Put it in your mouth. If you start talking, it'll fall out. Izuku's eyes widened. It was such a simple solution that Izuku didn't know why he hadn't ever thought of it before. Thank you so much. Whatever. She settled back into her seat and crossed her arms. Just use your chew toy so the rest of us can hear the DMN assembly. Izuku nodded frantically and bit down on the pencil as he turned back to the stage. President MIC, having failed spectacularly at getting a response from the crowd, had apparently just decided to move on to the next order of business. Well everybody, welcome to UA High, the premier hero school in Japan. To our upperclassmen, welcome back and good luck with your next year of studies. To our brand new first years, congratulations. Not just anybody can walk these halls, and it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to sit where you're sitting. That being said, don't go getting complacent, little listeners. You've each got your own stars that you're reaching for and you're each gonna have to work extra hard, got it? So you're all gonna have to go beyond. Plus ultra. This time, at least, the students responded exactly how President MIC wanted, earning a wide smile as he skipped back to the line of chairs across the stage where all the teachers and faculty were sitting, two of which were empty for some reason. Were there more teachers that weren't at the assembly? Or did they set up extra chairs for some other reason? The next part of the assembly consisted of the faculty all introducing themselves briefly, and Izuku dropped the pencil in his mouth twice as he instinctively started to ramble about each hero's quirk. He ended up taking out his own notebook and writing down his observations instead, adding subtle observations that he was only able to notice from up close. He was at UA. He'd be learning from pros. It was still so surreal. After each of the gathered teachers had gotten the chance to introduce themselves, President MIC stood again. All right, listeners. Some of you may have noticed a couple empty chairs up here next to us awesome teachers. This is because there are two teachers you all haven't met yet. You upperclassmen know who one of them is, but for the first years, you might be lucky, or unlucky, enough to see our local cryptid in the halls. Aizawa Shouter, pro hero name, Eraserhead, is off hazing his own first-year class, so wish them luck. They're gonna need it. Izuku's eyes widened. The underground hero. He couldn't beat All Might as Izuku's favorite hero, because All Might, but he was a close second. He fought practically quirkless and could take away other people's quirks at will. And he was a teacher here. What did present MIC mean by hazing? Was that where Katsuki was? Izuku felt a brief surge of jealous anger. Katsuki got to learn from one of Izuku's favorite teachers. He wouldn't even appreciate the nuances of Eraserhead's fighting style. Unbidden, an image of Katsuki getting his explosions erased as he was tangled in Eraserhead's capture weapon came to his mind, and Izuku snickered quietly. Okay, so maybe Katsuki learning from one of his favorite heroes wouldn't be all bad. But that still leaves one more teacher that you listeners haven't met yet. Present MIC continued. Here's a special new addition to our staff this year. You first-year hero students will be in for a real treat because here he is, the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, and the newest member of our staff. All Might. Izuku's jaw dropped and he knew he wasn't the only one as a booming laugh echoed around the auditorium and the #1 hero himself strode out from behind the curtain. I am here to help mold the next generation of heroes. The auditorium exploded in applause and Izuku added to it wholeheartedly. He was going to be in the same building as All Might. This must be why he was in town. But how was he going to teach classes if he only had 3 hours in his hero form? Did he still have 3 hours? Or had saving Kaken from the sludge villain cut down on that time? What were the repercussions of him going over his limit? There was a clatter as the pencil dropped to his lap again, and Izuku hurriedly put it back in his mouth so he wouldn't mutter. Thankfully, no one could have heard him over the applause, but it would still be better to think about that when he was alone. Maybe he could come up with some way to counteract or even just minimize the effects of his injury. Or maybe Mai could come up with some sort of illusion tech so he wouldn't have to use his hero time to teach. But that would involve telling her about All Might's other form and he couldn't betray the hero's trust like that. Later. He could think about that later. For now, though, All Might had taken a seat in one of the empty chairs that was almost ridiculously too small for him and Nezu was climbing a small set of steps up the side of the podium. Hello students. Am I a mouse? A dog? A bear? What's important is that I'm the principal. UA has a spectacular legacy and Nezu began to talk about the history of the school and Izuku was on the edge of his seat as he listened. For the first 10 minutes. Mai had lost interest after 3 and began to sketch out invention ideas again. Izuku really tried to pay attention. This man was going to be his teacher. He couldn't just tune him out. His classmates seemed just as bored as he was and eventually Izuku decided that he could probably just apologize if he needed to and turn to fleshing out his analyses of the staff. Occasionally, Mai would poke his arm and point to a particular diagram, asking an unspoken question and he would think for a moment before writing something beside her drawing. It went like that for another 15 minutes before Nezu finally stopped talking. But I'm getting carried away. Nezu clapped his paws together, waking up a few of the students that had fallen asleep during his speech. You all have bright futures ahead of you and we are so excited to help you cultivate that light. So, as the principal of UA, congratulations and welcome to UA High School. There was a hesitant round of applause that got louder as Nezu descended the steps and the teachers all left the stage to go retrieve their classes. Within a few minutes, Power Loader was leading them back to the classroom. As they were walking back, the kid in their class with the shark quirk placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder and patted it consolingly. I'm sorry, Midoriya. I don't know how you're gonna survive being Nezu's personal student if he's really that long-winded all the time. He wasn't that way during the entrance exam. Izuku tried. But maybe that was just because he didn't want to distract me as I was hacking UA. He ended up running into the girl walking from front of him as his classmates stopped walking in shock. You hacked UA during the entrance exam. What the F? I didn't get very far. Izuku defended, waving his hand in front of him nervously. I think they just wanted to see how I approached unsolvable problems, that's it. Yeah, Mai said, and I'm sure it didn't hurt that you'd already gotten a head start before the exam even started. Izuku turned to her in betrayal. Mai. Their classmates kept their distance from the two for the rest of the way back to the lab. When they got there, everyone sat down at their tables and Izuku went back to his room. noticing for the first time that there was a small school desk that had been placed outside the door, probably for when the class had a lecture instead of lab time. Before he could decide if he was supposed to go into his room or sit at the desk though, Power Loader cleared his throat to get their attention. "We have about 20 minutes until class officially ends," he said. "So, why don't each of you introduce yourselves? I know that the support course has a lot more individual work than the business course or the hero course, but it will still be helpful to get to know your classmates. Who wants to go first?" The kid with the shark quirk shrugged and stood up. "What do you wanna know?" "Just say your name and quirk, dumbass," the curly-haired girl griped. Izuku felt his stomach sink. Yeah, he knew it was coming, but it still would have been nice if he didn't have to reveal his quirklessness right off the bat. Oh well, they already thought he was creepy, now there'd just be pity mixed in. "Also include why you chose support," Power Loader added. "It'll be helpful to know each other's motivations." "All right." The kid with the shark quirk shrugged again. "I'm Ryu Hanzu. My quirk's Great White, and I want to make waterproof tech. My quirk lets me do anything a shark can do, which means I can breathe underwater, so I spent a lot of time swimming as a kid, and would have totally spent weeks at a time in the ocean, but my phone and video games wouldn't work, so I'm gonna fix that." Izuku had never realized that would be an inconvenience to people with amphibious quirks, but he supposed that it made sense. Most technology was made to be used by people in air, and even most waterproof technology had a limit of either time or depth. Hanzu would definitely have a niche as an inventor if he could figure out how to move past those limitations. The class's eyes turned to the bald kid with pointed ears, who was sitting next to Hanzu. "Oh, I'm next. Okay, my name is Shin Shiguro and my quirk is called Goblin. I, instinctively know the location of any non-living object I've ever touched. The accuracy goes down with time though, so if I haven't touched something for 10 years, I'd be able to tell you the city it's in, but not any more specific than that. I, just like building things." He sat down almost before he'd finished speaking and the class turned to the next student, which was the girl with curly hair. "I'm a Kane Kohaku and this mess," the girl gestured to her curls, which rattled slightly as they caught the light, "is my quirk. It's called copper wire and it's a total pain to cut. Yes, it conducts electricity, yes, I use it in my inventions, no, you can't touch it. Got it?" The introductions continued like that for the rest of the class until it got to Hi. My Hatsume, future CEO of Hatsume Industries. My quirk is Zoom and it lets me see up to 5 kilometers away. My babies are gonna change the world. Izuku chucked quietly as he noticed their classmates instinctively lean back from Mai's enthusiasm. He was finally getting used to it himself, but it was still funny to see how other people reacted to her. Izuku noticed that the class was looking at him and he froze as he realized he was next. In fact, he was the last student to introduce himself. Hesitantly, he stood up. I'm Izuku Midoriya. I like analyzing heroes and quirks, so I want to be a support analyst and help heroes work smarter and be better." Izuku glanced at the clock. Class should be ending any second now. He could do this. Just bite the bullet. "And I'm quirkless." The bell rang. Izuku grabbed his bag and bolted as soon as he heard the bell. A small part of him knew that his classmates might not reject him right off the bat, this was UA after all, but the larger part of him knew that wasn't very likely. These kids were still human, which meant that they would still see him as weak and defenseless now that they knew he didn't have a quirk, just like Katsuki had. He hadn't even noticed Mai chasing after him until she grabbed him by his arm and spun him around to face her. "Izuku Haka Midoriya, just what do you think you're doing? Breaking out the middle name. This must be serious." Izuku chuckled nervously. "You do realize I might have a real middle name, right?" "It's too late to change it now, Izuku-an, your middle name is Haka." Mai dismissed. "Now, why'd you run away like that? Why do you think?" Izuku couldn't help snapping, but then forced himself to take a deep breath. He wasn't used to letting himself feel frustrated about things like this, but that still wasn't any reason to take things out on Mai. I'm sorry, Mai-chan, but believe me, it's better if I can just avoid everything that was about to happen. People don't tend to react kindly when they learn I'm quirkless." You have to give people a chance to be good, Izuku-an. Mai stomped her foot. You can't just run away because you assume people are going to hate you. What if I hadn't forced you to listen after you told me? Would you have run away then too? Yes. Izuku was only able to hold himself back from yelling because he remembered they were still in the hallway. Look, you're the exception. All my life, the second anyone has learned that I was less evolved, they've turned on me. Everyone. Even my own mother started seeing me differently. I'm tired, Mai-chan. I just didn't think I wanted to deal with that today, okay? Mai looked as shocked as Izuku felt at his outburst. He hadn't really realized that all that was bubbling under the surface when he ran away from his classmates. He just thought he was scared. He didn't know, but now that he was thinking about it, he realized that his frustrated self was probably more honest than he was used to being with himself. He was tired. Sick and tired of the constant betrayal that came with people abandoning him. He didn't want to do it anymore. Izuku, Mai's expression shifted from something almost like pity to a determined glare, and he had to take a step back as she grabbed his arm and started dragging him back toward the classroom. No. I'm not gonna let my best friend run away from potential allies just because he's scared of a little rejection. Any good inventor knows that you can't let a few explosions drive you from the lab. I'm not an inventor. Izuku dug his heels in and tried to yank his arm back, but Mai had years' worth of muscle from hauling around tools and materials, so all he did was slow her down. I'm an analyst. I use past data to make predictions. And all my data is pointing to this not being a good idea. Your data set is skewed. Mai countered. Now get back there and make friends. No. They were so busy with their modified game of tug-of-war that neither of them noticed Nezu hanging upside down from the ceiling until they were right in front of him. Hello. Izuku yelped and Mai stumbled backward. Without her actively pulling against him, Izuku's own momentum was too much and he fell to the floor, pulling Mai down on top of him. His face grew hot as he realized that not only had the principal of UA, and supposedly his new personal mentor, caught him in the middle of a childish fight, but then Izuku had to make things worse by literally tripping over his own feet. Couldn't he catch a break? Oh dear. Nezu smiled pleasantly. Well, this seems to be quite the predicament. Mai didn't waste any time untangling herself from Izuku, who groaned as she accidentally slapped him in her haste to get to her feet. Well, it was probably accidental, but really, who knew when it came to her? Either way, within seconds she had scrambled to her feet and started shaking Nezu's paw enthusiastically. I'm Mai Hatsume, future CEO of Hatsume Industries. She grinned. And your principal Nezu. Izuku hid his face in his hands, silently screaming in embarrassment, but Nezu didn't seem fazed by Mai's behavior at all as he simply chuckled, that I am. And I know who you are, Miss Hatsume. I saw your entry for the entrance exam and I must say that I am very excited to see what you'll do here at UA. Do you mind if I steal young Midoriya from you for a moment? I'll return him by tomorrow. Before Izuku could protest being referred to as an object, Mai grinned, of course. She grabbed his arm and yanked him roughly to his feet. Nezu was no help and simply grinned knowingly as Izuku was manhandled by his best friend. Mai shoved him forward, effectively handing him off to the principal. See if you can get him to stop being an idiot while you're at it. Nezu laughed. I will do my best, Miss Hatsume. You'll have your work cut out for you. He's too stubborn for his own good. She turned on her heel and waved as she started walking away. Good luck, Izuku-an. See you tomorrow. Izuku gulped and turned back to the principal. Hi. Nezu simply smiled, seemingly unbothered by his awkwardness as he started leading Izuku down the hall. Hello. How was your first day? Did everything go well? Izuku nodded, pushing the whole situation with his quirk introduction out of his mind. It was really good. I heard that you had a hand in setting up my workstation, so. Thank you. Oh. Nezu's smile grew a little more excited. Was everything to your liking? The moment I saw your request form, I thought, this simply won't do at all. You can't learn without the right materials, after all. It just seems like a little much. Izuku said softly. You really didn't need to go to so much trouble for me, I'm sorry. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 waved his paw dismissively, not at all. In fact, it was rather fun, so you were doing me a favor. Izuku hadn't thought of it that way, but he supposed that Power Loader had said that 𝐻𝐻𝐻 had enjoyed setting up his little room. Oh, then you're welcome, I guess. They had arrived at a door that Izuku recognized from his entrance exam as the principal's office. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 opened the door and gestured for Izuku to go in. Tea. Wise, please. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 grabbed a kettle from the side table and poured hot water into 2 cups, putting the tea bags in before setting them on the desk and inviting Izuku to sit down. Now, I'm sure you're eager to get home, and you're most likely wondering what this is all about, correct? Izuku nodded hesitantly, just a little, though I'm pretty sure you wanted to talk about my analysis lessons, right? Power Loader said something about me being your personal student, so that is partially correct. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 took a sip of tea. I do want to talk to you about that. However, there is something else. Power Loader mentioned that the support students work on projects over the course of the semester, correct? He said something about that in my acceptance letter. Izuku confirmed. But he hasn't said anything else about it. Ah, well, Midoriya, each first-year support student chooses a project to work on every semester, and most of your grade is based on your adequate completion of it. Most students in your class will be working on an invention, but I have something a little different in mind for you if you find it agreeable. Izuku nodded and took a sip of his tea as he waited for 𝐻𝐻𝐻 to continue. Was he supposed to say something? But he didn't want to interrupt the principal of UA. Thankfully, 𝐻𝐻𝐻 took his nod as answer enough and continued talking before Izuku could work himself into a full anxiety attack, wondering how he was supposed to act around such a smart and important person. Well, not person, but authority figure. Izuku hadn't really had many positive experiences with those. I would like you to make a full analysis of the first-year hero students' quirks. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 said. They are still young and lack training, so they have a lot of room for improvement. You should focus your analysis on how they can play to their strengths while hopefully minimizing their weaknesses. These will be given to the students for them to use, so you'll be able to see the difference your skills can really make. Is that acceptable? Yes. Izuku sunk back in his chair sheepishly. I mean, yes, that sounds like it will be a good project. It's not bad to be excited. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 chuckled, making Izuku blush. In fact, that enthusiasm is probably a large part of why your analysis is so advanced at such a young age. I wouldn't have chosen this project if I didn't believe that you would enjoy it. Thank you. Izuku wrung his hands together anxiously, but, I don't think my analysis is really that advanced yet. I still have a long way to go. But of course. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 smiled. This is a school, after all. But that brings me to the next part of our chat. You do realize, of course, that as an analyst, you will often have access to sensitive information, whether this is given to you so that you can do your job or whether it is something like a hero's weaknesses that you've figured out yourself, correct? Izuku nodded, wondering where he was going with this. Well, I was planning on giving you full access to the school's camera system so you can easily observe the first years wherever they happen to be. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 said. But, if you are observing correctly, you might become privy to certain circumstances when it comes to one of our faculty. This information cannot be allowed to get out, you understand? Izuku nodded anxiously. Was he really being entrusted with big secrets on his first day? What if he somehow messed it up? What if he accidentally posted something that exposed the secret and then the staff would hate him and he'd get kicked out of UA and blacklisted from all the other schools? And a knock on the door startled Izuku out of his spiraling thought. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 jumped down from his chair to open the door, and here he is now. Welcome, All Might. Come inside. Izuku practically deflated in relief as he saw All Might in his skinny form hesitantly walk in the door. You were just talking about All Might's other form. I already knew about that, so you don't have anything to worry about. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 grinned manically and All Might did a double take and spit up a few drops of BLD as he saw Izuku sitting at the desk. 𝐻𝐻𝐻. That's a student. Yes, that's Izuku Midoriya, my personal student. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 said, almost proudly, if that was even possible. I thought it would be best to tell him about your injury before he saw you change forms on the cameras, but it seems I had nothing to worry about. But, All Might opened and closed his mouth nervously a few times. How? You, Izuku's stomach dropped slightly, you don't remember me. All Might looked between Izuku and Nezu, confused, and a wave of disappointment washed over him. He didn't know why he expected All Might to remember him, but for some reason he'd assumed he would. That short conversation had completely derailed his life and knocked him forcefully onto a new path, so it just seemed so important to Izuku, but to All Might, it was just another conversation with a fan. Of course he didn't remember every fan he'd talked to. Remembering one person would be completely unreasonable. Izuku forced a smile onto his face, burying his disappointment in logic. It was almost a year ago, so it's okay that you don't remember. I asked you if I could be a hero and you encouraged me to choose a more realistic path. He chuckled awkwardly. I did. I still want to help people, but decided it would be safer if I did that from behind a computer, you know. Oh, All Might still looked confused, but after a moment, there was a flash of recognition. You were that quirkless boy. Izuku smiled and shrugged. I'm going to be an analyst. If you'd never saved my life that day and taken the time to talk to me, I would probably still be chasing an impossible dream. I'm a lot happier now, though, so, thank you. All Might shuffled awkwardly, glancing to Nezu, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. I'm, glad I could help. Izuku nodded and turned back to Nezu. Well, I've known for a while now and haven't told anyone yet, so was that all you wanted to talk to me about? For now. Nezu confirmed. Anything else can wait. Now, shouldn't you be getting home? Yes. Izuku bowed to them and grabbed his backpack before running to the door. Thanks. All Might hesitantly started edging for the door as well. I should probably be heading out as well. Izuku was already on his way out, but he could have sworn there was a slight chill in Nezu's voice as he closed the door. Actually, All Might, why don't you stay for a cup of tea? I believe we need to have a little chat. Izuku intentionally left later than he should have for school so that he wouldn't have to deal with his classmates, which was worth the risk of running into Katsuki on the train. He honestly wasn't planning on being as late as he was, but when he reached the station, he caught sight of Katsuki already waiting for the train. Luckily, he was facing the other way so he hadn't seen Izuku yet and he was able to hide around the corner until the train left. It meant that Izuku had to wait for the next train, but he wouldn't have to deal with an angry Katsuki, so it was all good. As it was, Izuku ended up sliding into the little desk outside his workroom right as the bell rang. Mai was sending him the stink eye, but he resolutely ignored her as Power Loader walked to the front of the room. He knew she was just trying to do what she thought was best for him, but she'd never had to deal with being quirkless before. All right class, settle down. Power Loader said. Welcome to the support course. Today, you're going to be deciding on and starting your semester projects. These have to be approved by me, and I'll also be looking over them as you work to evaluate your progress and help you improve. I would personally recommend choosing a project that you would be able to use in the sports festival, since you're allowed to bring any support items you want, as long as you made them yourself. It's still a ways away, but it can sneak up on you if you're not careful. Izuku thought back to the project that the principal had given him. It wasn't an invention, but knowing all the first-year hero students' quirks would give him an edge that nobody else would have, so maybe that was why Nezu assigned him to analyze their quirks. He should try to give each of the students a few suggestions before the sports festival as well, to help them do well. He glanced over at Mai, who was already messing with the materials on her desk in excitement. Choosing just one project would be difficult for her. Power Loader called his attention back to the front of the room. You are also allowed to work on other projects for extra credit, if you want. These have to be approved by me just the same as if they were official projects, they just don't have to go as in-depth. I will be right up here if you have any questions or want to get your project approved, so don't hesitate to ask. With that, he sat back down and left them to their work. Izuku immediately bolted into his room so Mai couldn't try to force him to make friends and closed the door behind him with a sigh. Immediately, his attention was grabbed by a nondescript post-it note stuck to the central screen of his computer. Izuku approached it hesitantly, fully expecting some hatred-filled death threat. It wouldn't be the first time, though his desk this morning had been notably clear of graffiti, which was a pleasant surprise. Though maybe I had just scared them out of doing something that obvious. Izuku hadn't ever had someone who was willing to protect him like that before. Izuku didn't even notice himself clenching his eyes shut as he snatched the note off the screen and had to force himself to take a peek, only for his eyes to widen in shock and relief as he realized that the note was actually from 𝐻𝐻𝐻, not his classmates. Midoriya, here's the password to the camera systems. Ra+0 Verlord burn this note. 𝐻𝐻𝐻. Izuku read it twice until he was sure that he would be able to remember the password before looking around. Did his room have matches? He checked all the drawers and found every office supply he never knew he needed, but nothing that would allow him to burn the note as instructed. He couldn't just tear it up. Someone could potentially reassemble it and gain access to the cameras, and it would all be Izuku's fault. And then his spiral stopped when he happened to glance out his window and notice my heart at work. She made so many things explode that she had to have something capable of burning a tiny piece of paper. Right. But if he asked for her help, she might force him to confront their classmates, unless, of course, she was so distracted with her inventing that she completely forgot about her self-declared side quest. Izuku bit his lip and watched her for another long moment before deciding that it was a safe enough bet. The noise hit him immediately as soon as he opened the door. Almost everyone was working on something, and the happy sounds of drills and power tools seemed to come from every direction as he walked toward Mai's table. Mai-chan, 𝐻𝐻𝐻 gave me this note and asked me to burn it. Do you have something that'd be able to take care of it? Mai whipped her head around to face him, and he leaned back as the crosshairs in her eyes narrowed before she gave him a manic grin. Oh, a note-burning baby. I can make one. She reached for the note, but Izuku held it out of her reach. Actually, mine, I was hoping for something a little faster. Mai pouted, you're no fun, Izuku-an. Nope. Izuku agreed. Now, are you gonna help me, or not? Mai glared at him for another moment before sighing and turning on her blowtorch. Izuku smiled brightly at her as he lit the corner of the note on fire and let it burn. For a few seconds before dropping it onto the floor and stomping out the flames once the note had completely turned to ash. Their classmates seemed to be giving them a wide berth as they watched the exchange, but that was just fine by him. Thanks, Mai-chan. Good luck on your project. Izuku started to walk back to his room, but was stopped in his tracks by Mai grabbing his arm. Oh no you don't. Mai's grip tightened slightly as she grinned savagely. Izuku hacker Midoriya, you are going to talk to your classmates if it kills you. Izuku was honestly convinced that it might. You're my friend, Mai. Shouldn't you be trying to keep me alive? Oh, shut up, you're not gonna die. Mai waved the hand that wasn't holding Izuku hostage dismissively. Now, everybody, listen up. This idiot think that you all gonna hate him just because he was born with an extra toe joint or whatever, so he needs you to beat it through his thick skull that not everybody is like his old stupid bullies. Izuku hid his face in his hands and groaned as it turned red. It wasn't a safe bet. Well, at least he'd successfully burned the note and he could deal with all of his classmates' rejections at once. Small mercies, right? He prepared himself for the worst when he heard Kohaku scoff, you're fin kidding, right? Izuku uncovered his face to find her looking extremely unimpressed. If we're gonna hate you, it'll be because of something you did, loser. Izuku blinked a few times and flinched as someone patted his shoulder heavily. He looked up to see Hanzo grinning at him, something that was really intimidating, considering his 3 rows of sharp teeth. Yeah, dude, rejecting someone based on a quirk is totally uncool. Izuku's eyes widened and he glanced over the rest of the class, looking for any sign that they disagreed with what the other two had said. Most of his classmates just looked like they didn't care either way, which hadn't ever happened before, and the only one who didn't look bored with the whole thing was Shiguro, who was currently trembling. Being quirkless doesn't make you any less terrifying, Midoriya. Mai gave a shocked laugh and Izuku's jaw dropped. What? I'm not that scary, am I? Kohaku rolled her eyes. Yeah, and my hair's not a pain to brush. You caught the attention of Principal 𝐻𝐻𝐻, Midoriya. Of course you're scary. Power Loader cleared his throat and the class all turned to him. Midoriya, UA has a zero-tolerance policy toward bullying and discrimination. You shouldn't have to worry about that, And if anyone gives you a hard time because of your quirk, you are more than welcome to report that to me or to Nezu. And I won't get in trouble. Izuku asked, now reeling from shock. This all seemed like a dream. A good dream. But still a dream. He clamped his mouth shut when he noticed the heavy silence that had blanketed the room in a stark contrast to the happy sounds of working that had greeted him when he'd first left his room. His classmates were staring at him with various expressions of disbelief, shock, and even anger. You used to get in trouble for reporting discrimination. Kahaku asked. What the F? Well, it's just that every school has a zero bullying policy, Izuku hurried to explain, but most teachers tend to think that it's not a big deal. Or, not big enough to get a promising student in trouble for, but then something has to be done about the complaint and someone has to be punished, so. Yeah. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Powerloader said firmly. We actually follow our policies here. We couldn't call ourselves heroes if we didn't even protect our students from each other. Thank you so much, goodbye. Izuku held hurriedly and rushed back into his room and slammed the door, wiping at his eyes furiously the moment he was out of sight. They really wouldn't let him get bullied. It just seemed so surreal. He couldn't resist the urge to pinch his arm to make sure that he hadn't just overslept somehow, but even though he pinched his arm hard enough to make the skin turn red, he was still at UA, staring at his private room with a setup of computers that the principal had personally set up. This was really real. After a minute or so, Izuku took a deep breath to steady himself and sat down at his computer. If UA was going to do so much to help him, the least he could do was become an analyst they could be proud of, starting with his assignment from Nezu. Analyzing the hero course first years. Once Izuku gained access to the system, he spent some time familiarizing himself with the system, making sure he knew how to pan between the different cameras and could figure out which cameras covered which areas of campus. Once he was comfortable with that, he grabbed an empty notebook from the shelf and started debating the best way to start his project. The only problem was that the first years hadn't really done anything yet. Yesterday had just been the entrance ceremony and Eraserhead hazing his class, whatever that meant, but they wouldn't start combat exercises until that afternoon at the very least, so what was he supposed to do until then? Izuku thought for a moment before looking through the archives to see if he could find the entrance exam. Whatever it had consisted of, it was apparently a good enough demonstration of each student's quirk and combat ability to determine their qualification for the hero course, so if it was good enough for UA, it should be good enough for him. It was somewhere to start, at least. Thankfully, Izuku found the footage he needed quickly, along with a list of the examinees by area. On instinct, he scanned until he found Katsuki's name. Testing Area C, Izuku bit his lip. He didn't actually need to see Katsuki's exam, he knew his quirk well enough from a lifetime of experience to be able to analyze it in his sleep, but a part of him needed to know if Katsuki really was as strong as he'd always bragged. Before he could second-guess himself, Izuku opened the footage from Katsuki's area. The minute that people started moving, Katsuki blasted ahead of the other examinees and went to town, leaving a trail of robot parts in his wake. Izuku felt a surge of anger. Couldn't he at least leave some of the robots for other people? No, that would require him thinking about other people for once in his life, wouldn't it? As he watched Katsuki destroy robot after robot, Izuku couldn't help but feel grateful that he hadn't tried for the hero course. As much as he hated to admit it, he really wouldn't have stood a chance against robots like that. They weren't the kind of opponents that he would have been able to beat simply by analyzing them. He wouldn't have gotten a single point. Katsuki, however, didn't even blink as he destroyed robots left and right. The main issue that Izuku could see was his recklessness. True to form, Katsuki treated the other examinees like extras that weren't even there, resulting in several instances where someone could have been injured from either his explosions or the shrapnel and debris that went flying with the destruction of each robot. Izuku watched as Katsuki let loose a giant explosion less than a foot from another examinee's face, effectively stealing the three-pointer that he'd been about to destroy. The other examinees that he'd done something like that to had shrugged it off and found another robot far away from Katsuki's attack radius. This one, however, some kid with purple hair that seemed to defy gravity, got angry. Izuku grimaced, knowing what was about to happen as the kid yelled at Katsuki, who wasn't going to let an insult like that stand. To his surprise, however, 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 turned around and walked away, allowing the purple-haired kid to finish off the three-pointer that had been injured by 𝐬𝐬𝐴's attack. That couldn't be right. 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 would never have backed down like that even if All Might himself had been yelling at him, much less some extra that he didn't even know, so what had that kid said to get him to just drop it? Is there audio on these cameras? Izuku muttered to himself, looking at the files more closely. Even if there was, the noise from the fight would probably have drowned out the conversation, but Izuku had to try anyway. He had to know what that kid said. As it turned out, the cameras did have audio, but when Izuku listened to the camera he'd been watching, all he could hear was metallic clanging and explosions as the students raced to destroy the robots. He almost gave up, but then he realized that for an exam like this, Nezu probably would have gone through extra trouble to make sure that there weren't any blind spots. That meant that there might actually be a camera closer to where the two were fighting, just pointed in the wrong direction so that it had a different field of vision. Within a few minutes, Izuku had found a camera that was almost directly above the fight he wanted to listen to. When he first opened the audio, he was worried that he still wouldn't be able to hear anything above the noise of the fight, but after a few seconds, he heard 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸's familiar voice. He could barely make it out above the din of combat, but Izuku could still understand what he was saying if he concentrated. He rewound the audio a few seconds until there was the sound of a loud explosion, most likely when 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 attacked the robot, and then a voice he didn't recognize started yelling. "You almost killed me." That must be the purple-haired kid. "What do you think you're doing?" 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸's answer was more like a growl. "Get out of my way, extra. Forget about me and go find yourself another robot." Izuku waited to hear 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸's response, but it didn't come. Izuku looked at the time signature on the audio and did a double take when he realized that 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 had already stormed off to find another robot. He just told him to go away and he actually did. That didn't sound like 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 at all. Izuku facepalmed and laughed as he made the connection. He was an idiot, it must be the kid's quirk. There was no other way that 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 would have obeyed him. But what was his quirk? It would probably be in his file, assuming that Izuku had access to it. He navigated back to where the student files should be and entered his password, which actually worked. Information like the students' phone numbers and addresses were blocked out, but Izuku suspected that Nezu intended that as a mental exercise more than anything else. He didn't need any of that right now, though. He needed quirks. He cross-referenced the list of examinees in Area C with the Hero Corps students, only to come up empty. Confused, because someone who could get 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 to obey him was obviously extremely strong, Izuku widened his search to all first-year students. Hitoshi Shinso. Quirk, brainwashing. The three-pointer Izuku had seen him take out was about half his points, since his quirk wasn't naturally destructive, so he didn't have nearly enough points to get into the hero course, which Izuku honestly thought was a crime. Yeah, Shinso couldn't compete with kids like 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 when it came to destroying robots, but his quirk would be so useful for hostage situations and overpowered villains that couldn't be beaten head-on. And his quirk most likely had a lot of room to grow, since he could obviously modify memories with a simple command. 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸 would have turned right around to explode him the minute Shinso released his hold if he hadn't been commanded to forget about him. And since he could do that, there was a chance that he could train to be able to give more complicated commands and maybe interrogations, even though his file said he couldn't give any commands that required higher brain function. Yet, Izuku grabbed the notebook he'd ended up scribbling his thoughts in, tearing out the first page that had the beginning of 𝐬𝐬𝐚𝐸's analysis on it, and headed out to the lab again. The other students were all busy at work again, though Mai did look up when she noticed him, probably expecting him to come over and talk to her. He could drop by her table on his way back, but that wasn't his goal right now. He gripped his notebook a little tighter as he approached Powerloader's desk. Izuku felt bad about interrupting whatever their teacher was working on, but Powerloader had said that he was here to answer any questions they had about projects and said he wouldn't get in trouble for reporting bullying, so he probably wouldn't get in trouble for interrupting him either. Wait. Maybe he was supposed to go through Nezu instead because he was an analysis student. Izuku-san. Mai's voice in his ear made his jump and he looked over to see her grinning at him. What are you working on? Do you have a project you need approved? Are you gonna make super cool analysis babies? Well, it was too late to go back into his room because Mai had already caught Powerloader's attention and he was now looking right at them. Izuku took a deep breath and reminded himself that teachers were supposed to help their students, and Powerloader wasn't like his old teachers, so he wasn't going to get mad. Probably. You said we could do extra credit projects, right? Yep. Powerloader leaned forward attentively. Do you have one in mind? Izuku nodded and opened his notebook. Shinso Hitoshi. He's a Gen Ed student with a brainwashing quirk, but he originally applied to the hero course. I'd like to see if I can use my analysis to help him improve enough to get into the hero course at the sports festival. That's a pretty tall order. Powerloader said. Do you know how rare it is for someone from another course to actually succeed in transferring that way? The last one was Eraserhead when he was a student here. Izuku said confidently. But Shinso has what it takes. His quirk is powerful, it's just not any good against robots. Plus, this will be a good way to test if my analyses are useful. If I can help Shinso improve, then I'll know that my notes are actually helpful. Powerloader thought for a minute. As long as you won't get too discouraged if he doesn't end up transferring, then I don't see any problem with it. Ooh. Izuku-an, you said he's got a brainwashing quirk. Mai grinned manically. I could make so many babies for him. Powerloader. If I make some babies, could he use them in the sports festival? He's a Gen Ed student. Powerloader asked. He should be able to bring a single support item, but it'll need to be approved by Nedzu in advance. Good enough for me. We're adopting him. Mai declared. Powerloader just sighed. Adopting him? Yep. Mai smiled. Izuku-an and I are adopting him as our extra credit project. Let me read your notes. Mai grabbed his notebook and started reading while Powerloader looked at Izuku, who smiled and shrugged. Hey, at least she didn't try to call Shinso one of her babies. Mai hummed and turned a page. Where did you even find extra credit Kuan, anyway, Izuku-an? Izuku couldn't hold back a grin as he started walking back toward his room. He yelled at my ex-bully during the entrance exam. Mai cackled. Izuku frowned in frustration as he turned off his computer and gathered his things in preparation to go to their core classes. He'd spent most of the afternoon watching Class 1A through the cameras as they did some sort of indoor combat exercise that All Might had put together, and it was frustrating. Don't get him wrong, it was amazing to see all of the students' amazing quirks in action. It was just so frustrating to see them acting so far beneath their potential. Like that kid with the electricity quirk who fried his brain within seconds of the exercise starting, or the kid with the hot and cold quirk who didn't even use his heated side until the exercise was already over. They could do so much more. They could save so many people, if they could just think a little more creatively. And then there was Katsuki. He had everything. He had an amazing quirk, good battle sense, and even some of the techniques Izuku had suggested before Katsuki had started bullying him. He really did have the potential to be an amazing hero, maybe even the best, if he wasn't so violent. He hardly noticed my start rambling to him as soon as he sat down in the desk outside his workroom to wait for the teacher to arrive until she slammed her hands down and leaned down until she was nose to nose with him. Okay, what's up? Izuku leaned back slightly and stuttered, what? Mai rolled her eyes and leaned forward even more so that Izuku was forced to lean all the way back in his seat until his head was touching the wall behind him. You're dragging your feet. Didn't you get to watch the hero course fight today? I wasn't even expecting to be able to get a word in edgewise, but here you are giving one-word answers. Oh. Izuku shrugged. It's just Ka. I was observing my bullies class today. Instantly, Mai looked murderous. I can't believe they let that butt in after what he did to you. And didn't he try to attack extra credit Kuan during the exam? I should go straight to Nedzu and tell him that he needs to expel that JRK immediately. Izuku interrupted her with a sigh. You can't do that, Mai. First of all, my teachers purposely never reported the bullying so there wouldn't be red flags when he applied to UA. Second of all, he didn't attack Shinso. Even if he had actually hurt him, it would have just been as collateral damage, or in retribution for yelling at him. Last of all, he probably shouldn't be expelled. And why not? Mai's yell caught the attention of the rest of the class. He's a bully, Izuku-an. He made you miserable for years, He shouldn't be a hero. Wait, what are we talking about? Kohaku interrupted, pulling off the scarf she used to cover her hair while inventing, what's this about a bully being a hero? Nothing. Izuku said quickly. Mai shot him a glare before turning to the rest of the class. The traitor, Izuku's old bully, somehow got into the hero course. He was part of the class Izuku observed today. What? Hanzo bared his teeth, his normal wide smile becoming sharp and intimidating. What's his name? I just want to talk. Everybody stop. Izuku said sternly. Nobody is going to do anything. Nobody's going to try to fight him and nobody's going to Nedzu. Understood. Mai didn't drop her glare, but, no. Izuku held her gaze. So what did he do today that put you in such a funk? Kohaku asked. Like, I was expecting to have to tell you to shut up at least 3 times. See? Mai gestured broadly to her. I'm not the only one who noticed. Izuku shot her a look. It's nothing. Yeah, no, dude. Hanzo said with a small smile. We're not buying that. Izuku looked around the room, hoping for someone to be on his side, but even Shiguro shrugged. If it was really nothing, you probably wouldn't be so insistent. Izuku sighed. He should have expected that his classmates would be at least as curious as he was, especially after meeting Mai. This was what he got for joining the support course. It was just annoying. There was an odd number of students, something about a student leaving because of Eraserhead's hazing yesterday, so he was put by himself against 2 other students, one with a speed quirk and the other with gravity negation. Heh, Kohaku chuckled, shouldn't that be a good thing? I bet he got his butt handed to him, didn't he? Izuku shook his head. He put them both in the infirmary. Like, I know that violence is an inherent part of the hero industry. You can't defeat villains without hurting them. But none of the other students were injured badly enough to have to get medical attention. One of the signs of an amazing hero is actually how much they are able to avoid harm. He shook his head. I'm probably just being nitpicky because of our history. Probably. Hanzo agreed. But that still doesn't mean he should be in the hero course if he bullied you, dude. What's to stop him from going totally crazy and hurting someone who's not a villain? Shiguro nodded in agreement. I wouldn't want any of my old bullies to be heroes, either. Yeah. Mai crossed her arms in front of her chest. So I'm going to Nedzu and telling him to kick this guy out. That rat loves you enough to give you a whole room. I'm sure he'd be happy to expel him for you. Izuku wasn't so sure, but surprisingly, he realized that it might not be outside of the realm of possibility. It was so surreal to have adults who actually cared, and if that was all there was to it, then Izuku might actually be tempted to go to Nedzu himself, seeing as he most likely wouldn't get punished for snitching. But the situation was a little more complicated than that. It's not that I want Katsuki to be a hero so much that I don't want him to be a villain. Does that make sense? He's a bully, Izuku-in. Mai protested. He's already a villain in my book. Izuku looked around and saw his classmates looking confused and still angry on his behalf, but didn't see any of the understanding he'd been expecting. He sighed. He has the potential to be a decent hero, and his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains, but if he get expelled, or worse, blacklisted, what'll he do? At least as a hero, his violent tendencies will be directed toward villains and people who deserve it, rather than any civilian who looks at him wrong. Still doesn't mean he deserves to be a hero. Mai grumbled. Izuku shrugged. Maybe not, but it isn't even a big deal. It's not like I'm going to see him a lot. We're in different departments and I'm going to start arriving early, so I won't even see him on my way to school. The only interaction I'll even have with him will be my analysis project that he won't even read anyway. So just drop it. His classmates didn't necessarily seem happy with his explanation, but at least they saw the logic in it. Izuku supposed that was about as good as he could hope for. Everyone here was extremely intelligent, they wouldn't have gotten in otherwise, but nerds often weren't treated the best. Add to that Hanzo's mutation quirk, Shiguro's shyness, and my being. Well, and there was a good chance that every single one of his classmates had been bullied at some point in their lives. Of course they wouldn't be happy about letting a bully off the hook. There's gotta be a way to get some sort of revenge, at least, right? Hanzu said after a long minute. I mean, we can't just let that dude get off scot-free. Mai's eyes lit up, so Izuku interrupted, that's really not necessary, guys. No, Kohaku grinned, but it'll be fun. Mai grinned in return. Oh, I like you. Come on, Izuku-an. Revenge. We're the support course. We'll have access to all his babies. Izuku rolled his eyes. As fun as that would be, he's still a hero student, and it's our responsibility as support students to support him, not sabotage him. Not to mention that faulty support gear could potentially endanger not only him, but also his classmates and eventually civilians, so revenge is out of the question. Kohaku thought for a long moment, what about just being a little petty? Izuku looked at her curiously, which she took as permission to continue. I mean, obviously we wouldn't do anything to put him in danger or anything, that would be stupid, but you know how annoying a tiny little rock can be when it's in your shoe. Mai's eyes lit up again. You're suggesting we do a bunch of tiny things to annoy him? Kohaku nodded, grinning. It's how I got rid of my bullies back in elementary school, before everyone learned not to mess with me. The big thing is plausible deniability. Don't do anything that you couldn't talk your way out of if the teachers ask. But we'll know, which will be really satisfying if he gets a shirt that's say, half a size too small and the slightly wrong shade. Izuku thought about that for a minute. He had to admit that it might be fun, provided that no actual harm was being done, since he didn't want to become a bully in return or put Katsuki in any danger, and if he could stop at any time, I suppose it wouldn't be too bad to get a little payback. Yes. Mai pumped her fist and hugged him, causing him to turn bright red as the rest of the class laughed at him. Oh, we're gonna have so much fun. I'm gonna make so many little nuisance babies. Someone clearing their throat behind them made the class freeze and they turned around to see Midnight standing in the doorway, looking like she'd just arrived. You're not being naughty, are you? Izuku and Mai shared a panicked glance before he sat up straight and gave a bright smile. No, or at least, I wasn't, I'm already in my seat. Everyone else, however, the class rushed to find their seats as Midnight laughed at their reactions. Izuku smiled and took out a new notebook, simply labeling it nuisance. He'd known this year was going to be fun.